So we're returning to regular session, October 11th, Board of Education meeting. We're going to open the meeting with a public hearing on our code of conduct. I think if we look through this, this code of conduct was revised last year only. So the revisions that, are we making a presentation on them, or?
No, it's just, this is simply after the public comment.
Oh.
So if there's no public.
Okay, then there's
no
no.
then that's fine.
So I would just say that
Please,
there's
go ahead.
the only changes that were, there were some copy/text changes that were put into a chart, and there were some small language changes. So there's no real substantive change that's been made from what we had last year. So, are we voting on this? Or no?
In the core of the meeting will.
Okay.
So,
So does
because
anyone have
this
any
is
questions?
actually the solely the public hearing part.
There's no public. We'll keep rolling. We
Okay.
can talk about it.
Okay, that's fine. So we're going to move right to district announcements.
Sure. So, as always, in your materials, board and public who may be watching, there's a list of announcements. I won't read all of those since I think they're there quite clearly. And then we want to give time for other key parts of this agenda, the audit report, and also a digital learning technology presentation later. And there are a couple significant items within your policy section tonight, the code of conduct, but also then the video conference policy discussion. So let me stop there. And I may add, some of those announcements typically are things that Gus and Liliana may bring up in their portion of the process.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move to a presentation on our audit report, district audit report. Jeff, I forgot your last name.
Hey, Maureen, do you want to
Yes.
cue it up? Or?
Yeah, sure. So tonight we have Jeff Schaefer with us from our external auditing firm, O'Connor Davies, ODMD, actually. I just say that, I don't, Munns and Dobbins. Each year they perform a audit, and he can speak a little bit more to this, of our financial statements as required. This is a bit different from the internal audit function. This is really to ensure that our financial statements as we present them reflect that it's actually an accurate reflection of what our financial standing is, and they do a number of other items and help us be compliant, and that each year with the requirement from the State Controller's Office. So tonight Jeff is going to walk us through our year end and really just highlight our financial position at the end of this fiscal year, and just speak to a couple key kind of takeaways. And then obviously if the board has the materials and they have some questions, we can open that up afterwards. So Jeff, you can kind of take us through what we reviewed earlier.
Sure. Thank you, Maureen. Can everyone members of the Board of Education, my name is Jeff Shaver, partner with PKF O'Connor Davies. I know it's a mouthful, it's hard to...
I know. You keep extending it. So.
I'm happy to be here to present the results of the audit for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2022. I'll start by saying, presenting draft financial statements, we intend to finalize these after the board approves the drafts. And so they would essentially be finalized tomorrow, and they will be submitted to the state and the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, as the district was required to have federal single audit this year because of some of the stimulus monies that was received. There's, in the auditor's opinion, we've, in the draft opinion, we're intending on issuing an unmodified opinion. That's also referred to as a clean opinion, and that's the most favorable opinion that a district can receive. What that means is the numbers in the financial statements and the note disclosures are fairly stated and they're complete and accurate. And there's also two separate auditor's opinions related to internal controls over financial reporting, where we would be required to talk about material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. Happy to report that there's none of those to report, so that's also a clean auditor's opinion. And lastly, is new for this year is the single audit opinion or compliance report over compliance, and I'm happy to report that that's a clean opinion as well. Just like to take a second to thank the business office for the, the hard work that went into the audit. We were here in June for preliminary work, and again in August during the summer for field work. The entire team was very responsive and made it a quite, easy process, for us to work through the documents. And I'm happy to report that we're going to be issuing these before Friday, October 15th, which is the deadline for these to be filed with New York State. With that said, I'd like to just highlight some of the numbers in the general fund. If you're following along with the draft statements, it's page 58 and 59. This is the general fund, comparative schedule of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance, budget and actual. It's a 5-column presentation with the original budget in the first column as adopted by the board and the voters. The final budget encompassing any transfers or amendments made during the year. The third column is actual results. Fourth column is any encumbrances or open purchase orders, which will automatically roll forward into the next year's budget or 22-23 fiscal year. And the variance.
No,
No.
it's the draft financials,
It's if you go into
board docs.
board docs on new business, it's going to be,
It's under the business
I
section.
have an extra hard copy. Do you want one?
yeah, for everyone else, there's a soft
Oh,
copy.
Melissa will populate it in both places. She'll copy the link just so it's there.
There's a couple of them, there's different ones. Yeah, I think 3 is the, let's see, look into that. No, 3 is not the one. Oh, yeah, you're right. Right, on the right-hand side. Yeah, exactly. Page 58 and 59.
Sorry about that. I should have asked at the beginning. Of the spiral-bound book, draft financial statements.
Jeremy.
When the budget was initially adopted, it was anticipated $51.5 million of revenues would be collected. Actual revenues for the year were $52,661,000, or $1.1 million greater than was anticipated. You achieved that through excess sales tax distributions from Westchester County of about $300,000, some tuition billings to other districts of about $430,000, and state aid of about $200,000. On the expenditure side of the budget, or the appropriation side of the budget, it was initially anticipated $52.5 million would be spent. That number was revised slightly to $52.7 million. Actual expenditures for the year, $51.1 million. After accounting for encumbrances of $351,000, you had an underspending of your budget of approximately $1.2 million, or roughly 2.2% of the budget. There was also a transfer in from the special aid fund. That was a function of the federal stimulus dollars. It's required to be accounted for in the special aid fund or the grants fund, and that money was recognized as revenue in that fund and transferred over to the general fund. So that created additional budgetary surplus of $650,000 in the general fund, and that was for expenditures that were incurred in previous years.
Previous years, yeah. Refunds.
So you can see the total budgetary surplus on the revenues and expenditures and the transfers that I just mentioned totaled about $3 million. But keep in mind, when the budget was adopted, certain amounts of fund balance were utilized to balance the budget. That number was $750,000 from your reserves, $534,000 from unassigned, and also an additional $500,000 of encumbrances carrying over from the previous year. Or said another way, if you were to spend every dollar in your budget and collect every dollar in revenues, your fund balance would come down by about $1.8 million. That's what the initial budget anticipated. However, you did achieve the budgetary surpluses that I mentioned. The difference between those two items and the encumbrances results in the actual surplus or increase in fund balance for the general fund. That number is $1,378,000. So the general fund started the year with fund balance of $10.2 million. We end the year at $11,568,000. I just want to take you to, moving back to page 50, to take you through what that fund balance represents. This is a chart of all the fund balances of all the funds of the school district. The general fund is the first column. The second column is the capital projects fund. Those funds are already earmarked for the projects that have been approved by the voters. The district did issue a bond in 21-22, and there's the $2 million that you see there is left over as of June 30th, unspent
It's
on that
spent now,
project.
yeah.
They've probably spent it
It's
by
gone.
now at this point. And the other governmental funds are the school lunch fund, special purpose fund, and debt service fund, which have a combined fund balance of about $1.2 million. So moving back to the general fund, again, I mentioned $11,568,000 in total fund balance. The largest category within that fund balance is your restricted category of about $8.3 million. Those are various reserves set up by the Board of Education, in some cases by the voters, in accordance with general municipal law or education law, as may be the case, to be used for specific purposes. So you can only use these fund balance amounts for the specific purposes intended. There's a tax certiorari reserve of about $1.7 million. There's an employee benefit accrued liability reserve of $570,000. That's money set aside for teacher employee payouts when they would retire. Liability claims of $1.4 million. Unemployment benefits of $150,000. ERS retirement contributions of about $1.5 million. Teachers Retirement System or TRS contributions of $652,000. And future capital projects, which was a voter-approved proposition, $1.3 million. So that brings you to the total restricted funds of $8.3 million. Within the assigned category consists of encumbrances or purchases on order, which will automatically increase next year's budget. The district is already committed to spending the funds and has purchase orders outstanding. They will be spent in the next fiscal year. And then there's an amounts assigned for the subsequent year's budget, which is $854,000. That was a piece of the unassigned fund balance used to balance the 22-23 budget. The residual amount of fund balance, or what we call the unassigned fund balance, stands at $2,043,000. That number, it's important to note, that number is restricted by New York State law. It can be no more than 4% of your next year's budget. So this number is close to that number, about 3.7%. So you're retaining almost to the maximum amount allowed under New York State law. Just one other thing I wanted to point out on the, especially on the restricted, within those categories, certain amounts of those restricted fund balances have been used to balance the 22-23 budget. In the case of 22-23, or what we're reflecting here as of June 30th, 2022, $100,000 of the tax certiorari reserve has been used to balance the 23 budget, and also $850,000 of the ERS retirement reserve has been used to balance the budget. So a total of $950,000 of the reserves utilized to balance the budget. That's up from approximately $750,000 in the previous year. Also, within the unassigned, or the assigned category for subsequent years' expenditures, the district is intending to utilize $854,000 of its fund balance. The previous year was only $534,000. So when you add the two categories together, the increase in the appropriation of fund balance year over year is about $520,000. So just a small word of caution, if you increase that number every year, eventually you're going to start drawing down on your fund balance. And also keep in mind, some of the surplus that was earned during this fiscal year was a result of the stimulus funds, the federal stimulus funds that came through. They allowed the district to incur necessary expenditures, but kind of took them out of the general fund. So that allowed for additional surplus in the general fund. Just a note on some of the dollar values on some of your reserves. I just wanted to note your tax certiorari reserve is about 12.5% of your total exposure. So it's, usually what we see in practice, those cases tend to settle around 30 to 35%-ish. That fluctuates, but, somewhere around there. So you're certainly, could use some additional funding in that reserve. And your future capital projects reserve was established by voter authorization, and you're allowed to go up to 5 million on that reserve. You currently have 1.3. So certainly some room to fund that reserve in the future as well as budgetary surplus allows. With that said, that's all I really had to mention on the financial statements. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to try and address them.
A quick question, just on what you just touched on. So the tax cert is about 50%. It's a little of something you said that we settled for about a third. It's about 50% from where it should ideally be, right? How, just functionally, how does the district fund into that tax cert reserve?
That's typically budgetary surplus during the year. So if you have, if you have a budgetary surplus or increases in fund balance, the Board of Education would typically, at the end of the year, pass a resolution to fund an additional amount to go into those reserves.
And does that same mechanism apply to the capital projects?
No. You need to go to the voters for the capital projects.
You said there's a $5 million cap on that.
Oh, so now that you have the voter
Yeah.
authorization, you would
Yeah.
just be able to go as a board, yeah.
Okay.
And it actually speaks to surplus budgetary funds can be used to fund it up to $5 million.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think for this year, we have so much liability in our liability claims, and part of the surplus we had is we had about 6 cases, which the board has just recently approved, and many of them were back year cases. So because some of them didn't settle last year, we had to make sure that that was properly funded to ensure that we didn't have any, we would have technically not had enough money to cover those, in other areas like legal liability. So that was, the decision was made to put the funds there because we knew we had some, significant legal obligations to pay out this year.
So just connect the dots for me on the capital, future capital reserve and legal liability. How you can use that money by funding for legal liability?
No. What I was saying is when we made the designations this year, when I think it was maybe the second meeting in June, the thinking about when we had surplus, where those surplus dollars would go was based upon like where we anticipated so the liability claims we anticipate between this year and next year, those liabilities will be paid out, where with the tax cert, although we would like to fund it at a higher level, we know we have a little bit more time, like the timing of those. I think the 1.7 in the next 3 years will be sufficient. It's just about the years beyond that. We know we have, as Jeff mentioned, I think currently at the end of last year, we had $11 million worth of claims. Typically they settle at, historically at 35 or 40% or 30 to 40% of what is being, what people are filing against us. So, and we have had years in which we've paid out millions of dollars in claims. So, but the priority this year in terms of the excess monies were to put in the liability because we have some current real liabilities that will be due in the next year or so.
Any other questions for Jeff? Comments?
If you turn back to page 58, there's a question on the original budget items.
Sure.
We just passed a budget, and I think a lot of the board members, myself included, were used to seeing revenues be exactly what we expect to see for expenditures. Is the missing number, a lot of it in that, not missing, that's a bad word. The difference would be the transfer in, transfer out, but that only seems to make that gap larger. So, somebody looking at this page 58 here, I don't believe the original budget said we expected to raise $1 million less than we expect to spend. And yet by the end, we do the opposite. So first part, just the original part, what line am I missing on that one?
So there's 2 things going on. One is encumbrances that are rolling over from the previous year, and that shows as a use of your fund balance. So that makes it looks like your budget does not balance.
That's what it
So that's part of it. The other part is appropriation of fund balance, which I don't think
Yeah.
we typically, at least in the financial statements, don't show that as a revenue item. It's a planned use of fund balance. So you would, the board typically, what most boards do, is that when they're appropriating fund balance, they adopt a budget essentially is not balanced. You plan on taking from your savings account, your fund balance, to balance.
We took 750,000 the previous
Yes.
year.
Exactly.
And then we must have also planned on it, so, okay. So our original, I mean, we were always in alignment, but in
Yes.
different ways to show it.
Exactly.
Yeah, the financial statement, when we present the budget to the public, we always want to show it as a balanced budget, revenues and expenditures. But on the financial statements, it looks a bit different. It's on that bottom where you're seeing the top revenue would suggest like we had planned for less revenues than expenditures, but it's because of the planned use of fund balance. But in terms of, like, when we show our budget, Jeff, in the document to the voters, we show like how we're balancing the budget by showing that as a
Okay,
line
so
item.
you show those as revenues,
Yeah.
appropriation of fund balance.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
The-
correct, yeah, yeah. I think, and
Understood.
a lot of
So-
districts do, I mean, not all, but I think it's clear to the public, because if you were not to do that, it wouldn't, like.
It would look like it wasn't balanced.
It would look like an
This is the
unbalanced
re-
budget.
Like the
Mhm.
required presentation, and the concept behind it is appropriation of fund balance or use of fund balance is not an actual revenue.
Right,
You're not gonna collect that from anyone. That's spending your savings account.
Not revenue, you just
Yeah.
taking your own pocket.
Essentially, it is a presentation issue.
No, thank you.
Was there a second part of the question?
I don't remember it.
Okay.
Oh, they're clamoring then.
Jeff, if I might underscore something, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but, I mean, there are basically kind of three big numbers here. There's a revenue, there's the expenditure, and then the differential, how that then shows up in the fund balance. And if the fund balance, that's the third number, is growing at a higher rate, Hastings residents might say, wait, what's going on with that? That's why it's really important then go into that detail you provided in terms of breaking out that fund balance, because most of that fund balance, if that's our savings account, is highly allocated already. So there's only some little over 2 million out of 11 million where there's any kind of flexibility on. And my understanding is that we're close to the margin, the lower margin, what you want on that number. Is that, am I kind of summarizing this correctly?
I believe that's correct. Your reserves are funded adequately, but they're certainly not overfunded in any way, at least from the auditor's perspective. That's one of the things that we look at when we're doing the audit, to see if reserves might be overfunded. Like for tax certiorari, we look at the exposure outstanding to make sure it really, you have claims outstanding, and you actually do. There's actually liability claims outstanding, that's 1.4 million. Well, there's some real claims hanging out there. I mean, they haven't been settled yet, so they won't be paid until they're settled, but there's real exposure related to it.
and
the
can I
other
just,
two-
can I just say one thing about that? And then the attorneys, just on an audit, all of these things have to be verified. It's not so much as like, I'll just use the liability claims. It's required on a legal conference for them to disclose the actual litigation that's been filed and the potential of liability, because and sometimes it may look different, just like a tax cert, but you can't just establish a reserve and fund it without having a real exposure, not like, oh, this person tripped on this, like really like things that are claims that have been filed against the district. It could be, yes. Correct. And some of these do represent, as the board knows, the ones like, again, just recently that have been settled. We do have some things that are multi-year, 2 and 3 school years of claims for one individual. So this really represented at the end of the, at the end of the last fiscal year, the things that we knew, and, some we've dropped and some we've actually have more. So like it is, but they have to be substantiated within a certain percentage. And could I just, and Jeff, if all of those were to be settled and we felt at one point in time we had met those obligations and we didn't need it, we could release that money back to general fund. That's kind of what would occur if that were to ever happen.
What I'm trying to make it on a complex topic is hopefully a really important but simple point, which is we're running this district quite efficiently without extra money sitting around.
Yes,
Is that an accurate statement?
I would agree.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thanks. Jeff, thank you very much. Anybody else? Last?
The one point I just wanted to make is, I think this wasn't, sometimes it's not clear for people that have run a budget is, and Jeff mentioned it, but just to be crystal clear, we have $11 million in reserves, we've got 8 restricted. The only way that the money gets in, we can never budget to get that money into can't say we've got these liability claims, we're gonna have to budget that for next year. We've got these tax certs coming up, you can't put that vote out to the public for the operations budget. It has to be just a little bit, we got $1 million left over for whatever reason at the end of the year, maybe a couple teachers left, we didn't fill those positions, there's $1 million left over. We maybe put a couple $100,000 appropriated for the next year, a few $100,000 into this tax, into this reserve, that reserve. So reserves are something we like to really keep our eye on because you can't build them up quickly. They're only built up a little bit at a time based on legitimate things that you budgeted for earlier that you just didn't actually spend on, so you can put a little bit more in, a little bit more in. So just so people are clear on how the mechanics of that work.
Yeah, thank you, that's a good point.
And I will just highlight what Jeff, earlier noted was that much of the fund balance this year, again, at least on the expenditure side, a lot of the expenditure savings was driven on the fact that we received, not in addition to the CRSA money that kind of came in late in our budget process when we built this last year's budget, we received a significant number that was not really anticipated. So some of that really helped offset some of our general fund expenditures. So the net effect of that on the general fund balance was we were able to shift some other expenses to our federal fund. And if we ever, not for this evening, I can kind of show you, Jeff mentioned we had a single audit meeting. We had so much more federal monies than we ever had that picked up a lot of our normal operating expenses, which then the net effect of that is that we had expenditure savings. So some of our numbers are, I would say, artificially, because we got this large surplus of millions of dollars in a year over what we normally collect. And then in addition, we did have some other normal budgetary surpluses, such as I said with the tuition. That really represents 4 or 5 students that were placed in this district by other districts that we were not on the radar, quite frankly. And, or maybe we had some inclination that they may come, but at the time of the budget development, we didn't have, definite confirmation. And some schools pay us close to almost $200,000 or $160 for one child to be here. So there was $400,000 on that. But the other bulk of the money, which kind of helped us build up our fund balance, was really driven on a significant increase in what we know is we have money this year, and we have some of that money left. We'll be using the 22-23 budget, and then that monies are gone. Unless they're being replaced with something else, all that additional funding that Hastings received, which is close to $3 million in 2 years, with increases in other allocations that they increase our special ed funding and different buckets where we were seeing hundreds of thousands of dollars more than we normally get. And they actually have said it's part of that federal stimulus money.
Thank you.
So that's also just to be noted as part of this year, looking at it.
I just want to say that I'm very glad as an auditor you've been able to see that the financial health of this district is well managed. And I think it's something that our community wants to hear and want to make sure that that is indeed the case, not just coming from us. And I also appreciate the additional understanding in the fund balance, and when we have, like Maureen, you just said, when we have all these different tweaks happening, how we are able to build them, because it's just a good way of being a good steward of your own resources, even in our personal work, and let alone a district, in order to make sure that we have some buffer for all these things that we can just, life is very organic. So I like the fact that I'm not sure people heard you at the very beginning, but you mentioned these factors about our district that I think it would be good for our public, our colleagues in our community who are not sitting here with us to hear. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jeff, thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.
I have
Sure.
Jeff, I'd like to try to do some back of the envelope bad math.
Mm-hmm.
These numbers are like June 30th numbers, very specifically.
Exactly.
And then there was some speaking about how probably already allocated, not spent, but allocated by July 1st. If we could just jump maybe to like a fake August 15th date. Well, we just
reserves.
1.8 of it was already allocated to our budget. We had an 850 number, an
Yeah.
850 number, and 100
Yes.
for tax censorium.
Yes. Yes.
So 1.8
It's
was
gone.
not there by August.
Mhm.
Is the way we chose to
Mhm.
budget it, or is that not the way you would look at it? You want to do June 30th to June 30th? Am
Yeah, I don't think in August 15 terms, but, you know, if you spend your budget exactly every dollar of it and have no budgetary surplus, yes, on day one, the 1.8 is really gone.
That's what we presented to the community, that we were about to spend 55.5, and that's what we're using with that 1.8. Okay. So if I took out 1.8 from that, we would be at 9.7. Okay.
Okay, sure.
Then I wasn't sure about something I heard there, the 2.1 million that's future capital projects,
1.3.
Can I clarify?
please.
There's a capital projects
Oh,
fund.
sorry, yeah.
Okay? The capital projects fund is outside of the general fund. That's the 2.1.
That's what's left of the bond.
Yeah, that's what's left of the bond. The
Left of
voters,
the bond. Is that all? You talk, I'm sorry.
so that was already approved by the voters, I think, a few years ago.
Yeah, it's
And
a-
you issued a bond this past year, and you've spent it down, and there's 2.1 million or so left. By now, I think I might have said, you may have spent it already, because usually those are
We
ongoing
did.
projects. By now, it may very well be gone or close to gone. The 1.3 million is a capital reserve. So the voter, that's the 1.3, it's right on that's within the general fund. So the district went to the voters and said, allow us to save up to $5 million. There was a revision
Yes,
that was to the voters a few years after, I believe. Let us save $5 million for future capital projects that you haven't approved yet, okay? And they have the district has funded that reserve up to 1.3 million. Two totally different items.
So there would be no reason to try to subtract 2.1 from that 7.7?
No, no.
Because that was not part of the original 11.5.
No, think of it as, it's totally separate.
And the 1.3 is not related to spending to finish our bond project?
No.
either.
Nope. Mm-mm.
That's our slowly accumulated reserve.
Keep in mind, you'll have to go back to the voters in order to spend the 1.3.
Yeah.
Yes, it's in a reserve, it's not, certainly not up to us where,
Yeah.
how many Kit Kats we're buying. So if I was at 9.7, we did 11.5 minus the 1.8 million. Are there any other numbers in there that you feel might have already been allocated?
Well, I can tell you that.
I-
The only reason I say that is because in the last few board meetings, we've already released money out of the liabilities claims reserve as you've been settling the more recent settlements that have been
Related to special.
correct.
education.
So each time, typically I try to align them, like we have them on, you'll see where if those were ones that were part of this money, like we were aware of, you'll see the same day you're approving those, typically you may see a line item that says, approval to appropriate, I'm just making up, $85,000 from the liability claim reserve and then that's where we get those budget adjustments. So we have an expense, we reserve for it, the expense comes due, we take it out, we put it in the general fund, we pay the expense, and that's how that there's a fluctuation. And similarly, we have a couple tax certs that, again, not today, but I know that we have a few, like, relatively smaller ones that our attorney thinks in the next few months we'll be settling out a couple there. So to your point, Jeremy, there's a few $100,000 from July 1 to today that we've already taken from that reserve. And then also our capital projects reserve, as we know, there's a few items that have around the drainage that although we're hoping to get FEMA funding, that there's a likelihood we'll be tapping that down. And then also there's another one here. And then with unemployment claims, as we pay those out, because school districts don't pay FUI and SUI, we self-insure, or that's what everyone does. So we have unemployment claims that are just happening, with staff that either got laid off last year. So the answer is yes, in different amounts from different reserves. When we set up a reserve to pay those, as they occur, we pull out. So from the beginning of the school year, we have pulled money.
Perfect, that was exactly where I was
Mhm.
thinking, Maureen. But nothing where it's a whole number of it, nothing like that 850 that was counted by June 30th, but allocated by July 30th.
I mean, like he said, theoretically, if we go through the year and we don't have, if everything is, like, we spend everything we think we're gonna spend, that money is gone. And then at that end of the fiscal year, that's where you'll see, like, and if were unable to replenish it, those numbers would be significantly lower. So to your point, yes. In my mind, I think of that as starting July 1, if you do in fact need those, your fund balance is really at like 9 million.
That's what I.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
So I'm left with the impression that it's fair to say, if we had spent everything that we budgeted, and there's certain lines here that make you realize we've typically not spent everything we
Mhm.
budgeted, rollover, we might be in the $9 to $9.9 million range, probably not above 9.7, since we are constantly settling for specialized education or tax centauri. But we're not below that number necessarily at this, looking forward. I know you're more of a June 30th, Jeff, and definitely, I'm looking of course towards my.
Well, I think like especially with the liability reserves, I mean, they're set up for particular liabilities, and as we settle those, then, the numbers go away, but hopefully the liability goes away as well. So, as that number, I would think, will be lower next year because we'll be settling out a lot of these things. Forget about, being able to replenish. My guess will be that it would be, we want to try to maintain it. We always like to try to maintain as much as we can, but, this year in particular was a timing issue on some of the settlements that we ended up, that would have theoretically been paid out of even last year's budget that got moved to this fund. So the long and short of it is I don't think it'll be a little bit, it will be, I would have anticipated it being lower at the end of this fiscal year because we don't have federal money.
That line specifically, if liability in 2021 ended at the 760 number,
Yeah,
and we start the year at 1.4, that's a number where we do tend to, each budget meeting, vote on and spend out of that reserve.
yes,
Okay, so we might be closer to the 9
yes.
instead of the 9.7.
Mhm.
Just feeling like a budget reserve that has been planned and orchestrated and managed, maybe 9 out of like our $56 million budget. Percentage-wise, 9 out of 56, we're below 20%, above, right about at 15%. Does New York State give guidelines on that, or it's so?
There's no guidance like that, because it's really more, the guidance is more about your tax certiorari reserve can't be funded without claims that are real. So if there's no claims outstanding, you can't have the reserve there.
Right.
Same with the liability.
Yeah, liability is the same thing. We didn't have that up
If
until
you
a
don't
few
have a
years
claim
ago.
outstanding, you can't fund it. So each one has like specific rules related to it. There is no overall, your reserves can't be more as a percentage of your budget. I don't know of any such rules.
Might be very earmarked for a possible.
If you have huge amounts of certs coming, 20% may not be enough at all, or may be way too high, depending on, each district is a little different, so
And
I don't,
if you had huge amount of tax certs, you would only be able to fund that by having annual unspent money?
No, you
Or
could
that
issue
money
bonds.
put in you could do a bond?
You
for
can do a
tax
bond, but it's not, unlike the capital bonds, it does have to be accounted for in your tax cap number. So for many districts, it would be considered, in my opinion, like poor financial planning because you have the liabilities. I mean, obviously the public may not know, but we know, and we know that there's going to be a percentage we're going to owe the money back. So I think districts try to prioritize funding to that. Like if you have, I would think, like for me, if I'm talking to a colleague, as much as they might want to fund their capital reserve, where they would prefer it, right? If they will first go to where they think the liabilities really are, because it can happen. When I first worked, it was a long time ago, but there was a time where we didn't have a capital reserve and we did have to issue debt for those obligations that we knew we had. We knew we were gonna pay them, maybe not that particular year. And we, even back in the day, it was millions of, I mean, I'm talking about in the 90s, they issued a few $1 million worth of debt to pay off things. So, and even now, looking at what the interest rates would be this, in the current market, it would not be, in our best interest. So I think most districts, when they have the opportunity, do try to have funding there. Sometimes you can't have enough because it's may exceed, what you can actually fund. But I think it's better financial planning. You feel like you're putting away monies for things you're going to have to pay at one point, rather than issue debt to pay things that you owe, right? So I think it's good to do that, in my opinion.
And I'd wrap it up with the obvious thank yous, of course, to the people who actually make sense. Maureen, Jeff, thank you.
Thank you.
And just for clarity, I don't want the public to feel that when we start talking in April where our numbers are, that we went from 11.5 to 9. Where did that 2.5 go?
Oh, gotcha.
I believe that we're at 9, and as we get to future years, we could be looking at a number about 9. And we have 9, even though it's very well audited and taken care of. But that's not 9 in a cookie jar. That's not 9 million in a cookie jar. But it's not like it's going from 11.5 down to 8.5 at any point before we fund. I think if we all feel comfortable with that, understand that's where I'm at. That we're at about 9.
Right, it's a snapshot.
Expectation. And I appreciate the way you helped me get there, Jeff and Maureen. Thank you.
Just one quick observation. So there's a lot of strictures on funding the tax cert reserve. I think everyone has sort of brought up. I'm just looking forward. If we're entering an environment, potentially recessionary, things like that, do you tend to see more tax cert claims go up?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Because there's sort of a mismatch, right? We can't fund it until there's a liability. So we're always sort of a lagging, like the tax cert reserve is like a lagging indicator of where things are at. Have you seen districts get into trouble in that fashion? Where that mismatch suddenly becomes like acute?
Yeah, because I've seen districts have to do debt for tax certiorari's. It's been a while since I've seen that, but I have seen it. They don't have the reserves, and you have to, issue debt to pay the cert. You just couldn't do the reserve. So.
And to your point, Maureen, issuing that debt eats up the tax cap
Right.
of 2%, right?
Right.
Okay, just to be clear on that. Okay, I just want to clarify. Jeff, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Good. All right, we're going to move on to district highlights with Dr. McPherson.
Again, thank you, Jeff. Very, very, very helpful. Thank you. And to reiterate, for the record, all of those documents we discussed are posted and available so people can go study those. And it's now posted right up with the audit report section, 2A, and also the business section. District highlights, I'm going to be very brief and really focus on the portrait update because we have a couple of the big items before you as a board. Just want to note for the record that in the portrait update is a listing of the core team, the core group. That's now public. It's a group that was invited into this process. In almost all cases, those invited accepted the invitation. We had a couple where due to other conflicts they couldn't. So we went to equally top choice, but the substitute, if you will. So I think there are only 4 or 5 that fit into that category of not being able to accept the invitation. So it is a group that, as in other districts going through the portrait process, other than the board who picked their reps, the superintendent with very close guidance from a number of people, Melissa Szymanski, all of the leadership team, made that selection. I should also stress where you see various key roles, be they parents, be they teachers, administrators, they weren't selected by their organization. For example, we did not go to the PTSA. We talked about the PTSA. We went through the principals to others for parents, and we were supported that by PTSA and SEPTA as a way to sort of broaden the voice. Similarly, we did not go to the HTA and say, please provide us your teachers. We did not go to the HAA and say, please provide us your administrators. And similarly through CSEA. Made it a little more complicated, but I think it was a good chance to broaden leadership for this process and group. They are meeting later this month for 2 intensive full days. We think we'll be in this space. It's the one available space, so we're going to do our best to make it work. And it should be an intensive session. Related to that, point 2 on the portrait is the surveys are out. Distinct surveys for various parents by the age and grade level of your students, and we've encouraged parents to, if you have multiple children, you can fill a survey out for each child. The rationale is your children might be having different experiences, and you may want to have that show up in the data, so that's important. Similarly, teachers or all personnel have been surveyed, and with different types of surveys. Their community survey is out. We thank the village. Thank you, Melissa D., for coordinating with the village on that. They've pushed that out a great deal. And student surveys, grades 6 through 12, are underway.
Thursday and Friday.
Thursday and Friday. And there was a double announcement on that Friday to families, a brief one from me and a very solid, very thorough one from Melissa Szymanski out, explaining that what's really important is our panorama social-emotional process of gauging social-emotional learning. For the first administration of the panorama for grades 6 through 12, we put that on hold because a number of the portrait questions relate to the substance of the panorama, and we want to avoid survey fatigue. So again, that was quite thoroughly explained in Dr. Szymanski's letter that went out quite broadly on Friday, so thank you.
And I'll
for that.
correct it. It's Wednesday, Thursday, pardon me.
Wednesday,
Yeah.
Thursday. All right. And again, the survey, as I'm saying again, because it says in the documents, it's not a vote. It's not the single piece. It's one slice of the information we'll use in coming up with where we're headed. And I want to assure the board and the public listening that while there is a core team and they will work for 2 days intensively, this will be a very open public process. And the board will be hearing actively about what is going on, what's being recommended, and the board will have the ultimate decision here based on a recommendation. So it'll be all out in the public, lots of chance for discussion, lots of chance for a lot of input. Last thing on the portrait, point 3. Point 1 was the core team. Point 2 was the surveys. Point 3 is by the end of the week, I'm promised we'll have a dedicated part of the web page for the portrait process. Some of the best thinking you can do is stealing it from somewhere else. So in particular, Croton on Hudson has a very nifty dedication to the portrait. So we've gone and looked at their site, and we'll change the names, but we'll model it quite closely. They're at the end of the portrait process, or I should say in operation with an existing portrait, so we won't take that. But we will put up there the core team, access to the surveys, and all the rest. So that's my main update, was the portrait.
Okay, and just
There may be questions, comments.
just a quick question. The due date for parents to get the survey back
Is October 20th, and that's the same for everybody, October 20th.
for everybody.
Right, and it's an honor system. We don't think people will stuff the ballots here, because again, it's not a vote, it's one piece of evidence.
So it's a Thursday, though, just so you know.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
And will it be on the website before October 20th, or?
The links,
Yeah.
my hope is, yeah, I've been promised that this week the website will be, a portion of the website will be dedicated, and Melissa D. and others did excellent work creating the PDFs with links that work, et cetera. So we'll just put, I'm told, right, we just put those PDFs
Go
right.
to the website and just
Yeah.
fill it out.
Yeah, so am I explaining this correctly?
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other
Do they
questions?
do the alumni part of it?
We've not, for surveys, we've not reached into alumni. That could be something going forward.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I think that what you'll find is that we're into a several-year process here. This is just the beginning.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on, we're going to have an administrative report on digital learning and technology update. Dr. Szymanski, would it be fair to say that we're sort of, this is like a initial step, like an audit of what we do and how it sort of aligns to the NICEAD standards that make us do it?
Absolutely. So it's my pleasure to present to the board tonight around this, and it will include, it's actually very specific to the questions that were raised when I had asked, would you like to learn more about? And it's just the beginning of a conversation of work that's going to be ongoing over time. And that will include discussions around device use and financing. It will focus on the new New York State Computer Science and Digital Fluency Standards, thinking about where we are with technology, how technology is being used, what the philosophy is around that. Our technology plan that was presented in February of last year fits into all of this. So what I've done for all of you this evening is prepare something to be responsive to the initial questions from the Board of Education. And the topics that were raised were around investing in technology, applications,
You're
how...
in the presentation now, right, Melissa?
Yeah, yeah. How we procure them and how we let them go, how it's integrated into learning so it's being leveraged rather than taking over. People also raised wanting to know more about educational instructional technology in general, opinions of tech in the classroom, student engagement and off-task behavior, managing device use, collaboration, technology and students with IEPs, thinking about interpersonal and experiential skills that are expected related to tech, typing skills, and this notion of balance came up. So what I've done is organize the presentation. It's behind you. It's also available in board docs. But I've organized the presentation content by taking those ideas that were raised and building them into this flow. So first we'll talk a little bit about why digital learning and technology. Then we'll do a brief recap of the Hastings Technology Plan. We'll talk about use in the classroom, and this will be a discussion based on data and actually on-the-ground feedback from members of the faculty. Filtering and monitoring, how we let go of software, and also some financial considerations where I'll pass the torch to Maureen. And again, this is the beginning of an ongoing conversation. So the first area of the presentation is around the purpose, like why digital learning and technology. So as Dr. McCursey was just explaining, we're engaging this portrait of a Hastings learner process, and ultimately that's going to be guiding everything we do. In the absence of having that right now, we've done some visioning work along with the Hastings Technology Committee, which was the group that developed the plan that went to the state and recently got approved. And what the Hastings Technology Committee was discussing around in terms of their shared vision and commitment is really around this notion that tech presents unique challenges to schools because it's this constantly evolving process. And education is a constantly evolving process. So thinking about how we marry technology with learning and also thinking about the physical technologies and how they're changing. So the belief is that students, regardless of the career path they choose, they must be equipped with essential skills as a fundamental part of their general education, specifically around technology. And then keeping current is not just around purchasing the latest and greatest, but it's really around ensuring that we're grounded, our students are grounded in appropriate use of tech and thinking about form and function, what form would we choose for what we're trying to accomplish, and then a commitment to students receiving a quality education that includes both instruction in tech and also instruction that models effective use of technology. So New York State just recently introduced new standards, their computer science and digital fluency standards, and in a moment I'll give you a 3-minute brief snapshot overview of that so you'll have a better sense of the state's perspective on technology. But these standards sit across disciplines. They are not relegated to one content area. They're meant to be integrated across all content areas and thinking about a continuum for students. And what the state is saying, their vision is related to these standards, is that every student will know how to live productively and safely in a technology-dominated world. And that includes understanding essential features of digital technologies, why and how they work, and how to communicate and create using these technologies. So it's really around leveraging technology in a transformative way. So I'm going to show you where you can find the standards in their entirety and link them into the presentation. So this is just the link, and you can see the whole, there are multiple pages, very comprehensive. So there's a 46-page document essentially that the state has put forward, which is really quite specific around the standards. And what I just wanted to draw your attention to was that each of these domain areas, like computational thinking, for example, is further broken down and talks about what the expectation is and what that actually means. And then document. It shows the arc of what students are expected to be doing as they move across grade level bands. So that's in there. I just wanted to show you where that can be accessed. And now I'd like to play for you a 3-minute video overview, which I believe gives a very clear, clear picture of, just a nice general overview of the standards.
Our world is constantly changing, and it's technology that's driving that change, transforming every aspect of our lives, disrupting industries, and reshaping the way we work, learn, and communicate. And in the future, technology will have an even larger impact on the types of occupations for our students. It's been estimated that 65% of children entering primary school today will end up working new jobs that currently don't yet exist. Many of these jobs in technology and computer science will offer significantly higher than average pay. And even if students don't pursue a job in these fields, one thing is clear: the number of jobs that require competent technology skills are growing, and the number of jobs requiring no technology skill are shrinking. It's indisputable that technology plays a significant role in our modern society and will continue to do so in the future. But with this impact and reliance on technology comes both negative and positive effects. Issues like ethics, safety, citizenship, and equity, just to name a few. It's not enough to simply provide the access for students to lead productive and successful lives. It's vital that they know how to use and understand digital technologies. For this reason, the New York State Computer Science and Digital Fluency Standards were designed. These standards were authored by a statewide group of experts on computer science and educational technology with representation from all New York State regions, community types, and stakeholder groups. The standards are comprised of 5 concept areas and are expected to be fully implemented by September 2024. They were designed to be developmentally appropriate for all students, ranging from early elementary to secondary. Some of the skills include understanding the essential features of digital technologies, why and how they work, how to create and communicate, and how to be safe when using them. The end goal is to prepare students at all grade levels to make a positive global impact by demonstrating and understanding each of the 5 concept areas. As educators, we must prepare all students to live and work in our dynamic, technology-driven 21st century world. The New York State Standards for Computer Science and Digital Fluency are simply the first step.
So I thought that gave a pretty good general overview of what the state is showing around the use of technology and what the expectations are for our learners. And they've also made a very big commitment to making shifts that show that they're serious about students leveraging technology, even with state testing. And so I added this just to be informative and connect it. They have actually announced a transition to computer-based testing so that paper testing will no longer be an option for students. So they're making a shift. And the timeline is there. So we do have some time for that, and we've already been engaging as a leadership team with our partners at the Lower Hudson Regional Information Center around how we best prepare for that. So we're well positioned to start thinking about that shift. And you can see the timeline. So not until spring 2024, there will be required computer-based testing. And they'll begin with grades 5 and 8, and then the other grades will be optional. Then the following year, required computer-based testing for 4, 5, 6, and 8, and optional for grades 3 and 7. And then by spring 2026, it will be required for all grades 3 through 8. So this is part of our discussion. It's certainly not part of how we're leveraging technology use. We never want to be teaching to the test, but just to underscore that the state is quite serious about the expectation that students will be fluent in the use of technology. So just a brief recap. So in February of last year, I presented to you the plan that the Hastings Technology Committee put together, and the state has since accepted as our 5-year plan. And this is really around a few different goals that we put into play. But I just want to again highlight that we really are focused in this plan around digital citizenship, one of the areas of the digital, the computer science digital fluency standards, culturally responsive practices, and standards alignment. And so I'm presenting to you just also a little brief update on this as I'm adding to a theme that we're focusing on around students recognizing the rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of living, learning, and working in an interconnected digital world, and model behaviors that are safe, legal, and ethical. And so we've just presented to you around the computer science and digital fluency standards. And in terms of our implementation progress, in November, we're beginning this work with our library media specialists, our librarians, and our assistant principals. And we're starting to raise the awareness of these standards, these computer science digital fluency standards, partnering with Leslie Accardo from Lyric, who's been incredible in terms of bringing us along the way with our technology journey over time. And so that will be ongoing. I actually did meet with them today, talking about what the work will look like and answering any questions that they have. But we're going to be lateral learners together and really delve into this. And this core group here, the assistant principals and the library media specialists, will be the lead learners around the standards, the new standards, which will then be brought forth to the broader faculty as we move into the spring at faculty meetings. So that work has been designed and is already in motion. First session is November 3rd. So that's on its way. And part of what we'll be doing ultimately, over the course of the year, is really thinking about where are we? What are these standards? What are the things that we can elevate that we're currently doing that are going well? That we say, okay, we do this well, and here are some areas that we can start thinking about from a continuous improvement lens. I see this.
Sorry to interrupt. I just got to know that members of the public can hear you.
Oh, sorry. Absolutely. Thank you. So that work will start November 3rd. And ultimately, as we move through the year, it will entail just thinking about what we're already doing well and opportunities for us to enhance our practice. I see this work as very connected to the question that the board asked around, how is technology use being leveraged, which is why I mention it. I figured that this is an important piece to thread in here. And also around the Portrait of a Hastings Learner process, because again, although the state is providing standards for us that we need to meet, and we need to make sure that we are up to par on, so to speak, and meeting that floor, I like to call it, the state standards floor, the Portrait of a Hastings Learner, whatever comes out of that, we also want to make sure that that's where we're headed. We want to make sure that we're also really living up to our beliefs and values here around the use of technology. So that's a brief overview of the technology plan implementation status. We're really focused on that first goal and helping people unpack the standards and develop deeper learning around them. And I'd like to move into use in the classroom because that was the main theme in terms of the question that came up from the board. So I decided to approach this in multiple ways, which is, first of all, anecdotally, the leaders are in and out of the classrooms, and they see different things that are happening in terms of daily use of technology. But also I felt it was very important to get some on-the-ground feedback. And I actually sent out more of a qualitative feedback form for teams to put together and really work through. And so each team coordinator, team leader, or department chairperson really worked with their team or department to talk about technology use and feedback, some more specific feedback. And I've put together some themes that emerged from all of this, and also thinking about some highlights. So some things that stood out and also some patterns that we're repeating. So in terms of technology use by teachers on the grade or department, there were some very clear words that stood out, which recurred, right? So this idea of supplemental and interwoven, interactive, and varies. And these are really indicative of there's not a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach to use of technology, and that our educators see this as something that is supplemental and not the default, that it's something that is brought into practice, and this idea that it needs to be interactive and varies is important because it really does need to be that idea of form and function, the form of how I'm providing instruction or what I'm using matters based on what my learning outcomes are for students and how I want to be leveraging different resources. So what was reported back was around use of whiteboards. Most frequent uses, themes that came through, this was K-12, themes that came through were around use of the digital whiteboards. Digital assessments were frequently used. Google Drive was used for professional planning and resources, and that was for the teachers. Student research projects, instructional videos, the G Suite of applications, so Google Classroom came up again and again. Approved software programs. So we do have software, we have a vetting process where we can approve certain applications to make sure they're compliant with protecting students' personally identifiable information, and also thinking about how we're leveraging technology instructionally. Student accommodations and modifications, so using technology in a way to make sure that the learning is accessible. And then it's used often for logistics, so for taking attendance and for grading. So thinking about how that's used in the classroom. Those were the big themes, and those came up in the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school. Another question that was asked was around estimated range of the amount of time students spend on devices during class time. And so at the elementary school, the highest quantified responses, most frequent, estimated, not most frequent. So when you were thinking about the largest amount of time daily, the highest number, of minutes, was 30 minutes daily. And there was a caveat, 30 minutes daily, but not every day, that would be specific to a certain project students were working on. And it was in 3rd grade. And then the other one was a quarter of the time, depending on the learning activity. So that thinking about a class period at the elementary level, what would that be? And that was in 4th grade. So in middle and high school, the most frequent response was about a quarter of the class was dedicated to use of technology. And district-wide, overall, again and again, I kept seeing it depends, it varies, it depends on the activity, it depends on the content. But really those were, at middle and high school, most frequently, people were saying about a quarter of the time technology is being used. I just want to pause. We have students sitting here, and I want to just ask your perspective from the student perspective, is that fairly consistent? Do you see something a little bit differently?
When we're looking at this, is that including smartboards?
Including the time that students are actually on devices during the class. So not the presentation, but actually students being on their device.
I think it'd be hard for us to speak to elementary school for sure, and probably even middle school, because it's changed so much since we were down there. I think in the high school, it absolutely varies between class and science research, where it's all self-driven stuff. We're on computers for the whole class, almost every class, but there'd be no other way to do it because we're accessing resources that are online. In classes like calculus, we're barely on them. We've got calculators, but that's not sort of the same kind of technology we're talking about. But I think in the classes where technology use isn't either necessary or doesn't really make sense to be doing it all, I think your English classes or social studies classes, I think a quarter is about right.
Yeah, I would just think that word depends. Really comes in.
Yeah.
Day to day, some classes absolutely you are using them the whole time. Some of them, I'd say half the class, you are on devices. Like math class, you're not, but definitely my English classes for the majority, because some teachers are returning more to group work online because it is easier to share. It is easier to work on that from a distance from each other. So, depends.
Yep, and that's what we
Can
heard.
I just ask, because that means a quarter of the time, I believe a class is 40 minutes, correct?
40 or 80, it depends. 40 or 80, yeah.
Okay.
80 at the high school.
So that would be what, 20 minutes? So in a block, you're saying you might use for only 20 minutes?
I think in a social studies class where primarily a teacher lecturing and sort of telling you the story of, you know, the Protestant Reformation, yes, it's going to be about 20 minutes. I think in an English class it could be none, or it could be, you know, 3/4 of the class if we're working on something online. Like since we don't really write stuff out by hand unless we're taking notes, like writing on Google Docs is way easier than, you know, trying to move paragraphs around. So it could be way more than that.
Right, so you could be using to take notes. So the teacher is teaching and you're using your computer to
Usually
take notes?
not. Usually teachers are not okay with that.
The majority of our notes, I would say, are handwritten.
Handwritten,
Mhm.
okay.
But a lot of time assignments are both online and on paper.
Mhm.
So while you might be working more on a piece of paper, you still have your computer open, referencing or whatever it is.
Right, so is your computer open in class the whole time or no?
No.
It's not only open if you're actually using it?
Yeah.
Mhm. So continuing around the student, thank you, that was really helpful. And that is actually very consistent with what we're hearing, you know, and seeing, which is that it depends, it varies. You know, it's really around what's the learning activity and why would you leverage the use of technology, which makes a lot of sense. And then student use of devices, how are they using the devices? So in KN1, iPads are being used mainly to publish projects and practice some skills. In grades 2 and up, Chromebooks are being used, and they're being used to access resources, differentiate learning opportunities, for students to access assignments, and also texts that are not in classroom libraries, conducting research, developing skills for life, enhancing engagement, writing, completing labs, creating presentations, listening activities in target languages, thinking world language, reinforcement, and supporting students to stay organized. So those were more of the themes that were coming through around use of devices. Another question that I posed was around how you're leveraging technology to enhance student collaboration. And this was pretty clear across the board. It was around supporting students as they work in pairs and small groups. So if they're doing presentations, research, any kind of storytelling or shared projects, problem solving, that's used to help support that. Document sharing, so you could share a Google Doc with someone to get some feedback, to do some peer editing, taking notes. Jamboards. Jamboard is a tool where you can go into, you know, it's linked to the G Suite of applications. If a question is posed, the entire class can go in and put a post-it response, and that can be projected so that everyone can respond all at once, and that can be showed to the group. And then emailing, you know, having the opportunity to email. Some highlights that came through. There was a question raised by the board around typing, and is it formally taught, and where is it formally taught? So I did want to speak to that. So keyboarding without tears is the formal program that's used for teaching typing, and that's in grades 2 and 3. It is available after students have used it in grades 2 and 3 for independent practice in grade 4. And then it's often introduced to support students receiving occupational therapy, regardless of grade level. And then some highlights around the use of assistive technology. So often we have students with IEPs who use technology to make sure that the learning and the content is accessible and that their ideas are readily communicated. And so assistive technology is used in a variety of different ways, and that includes progress monitoring, so students can see their progress over time and adults can see their progress over time. It's used for movement activities, which we also call body breaks, breathing exercises, talk to text. So if writing is very difficult, being able to speak and it will transcribe it into text. Read to, so if a text is presented and you can just click on it, it would read it aloud. Pronunciation, digital text, reteaching, pre-teaching, reviewing, and access to class notes. Typing versus writing, so being able to use that instead of writing something by hand. Visuals and videos, so presenting things in a visual format. Translators, large print, spelling grammar check, an FM system, and also calculator access. So that's being used regularly for assistive tech. And then in terms of monitoring use, asking the question around monitoring use, and I always love asking this question because I think the highest leverage solution, so to speak, to the need to monitor use is to help continually be moving students along their journey around how to be using technology in ethical, appropriate ways. It's actually in one of the standards, like safe use of technology, and it's very common, just as we would on a playground, for example. I think there's that saying, you know, as you would if nobody was watching, like, you know, if the person wasn't in the room, right? And I think that that's an ongoing thing for students to be learning. And there's a piece around how do I leverage technology in an appropriate way, and at the same time, a big part of that is making sure we've created a scaffold where the adults are monitoring to help, you know, move that process along. Which they do through the forms of physical circulation throughout the classroom to be able to kind of peer and see what's on a screen. Programs that track student work progress, so you can actually see the taskbar moving if a student is completing something digitally. Work quality, so if something's turned in, you know, does it seem like it was quickly done or was there more time that was put into it? Shared documents, so being in a document with someone at the same time to be able to see if they're actively working in it. Light speed relay, which I'll get to in a moment. Peer monitoring, so group work, students keep each other accountable, right, to make sure that everyone's on task and contributing actively. And then uploading photos of classwork. So in terms of filtering and monitoring, there are a couple of things that I just wanted to note. And so for educators, we have light speed relay. And so at a teacher workstation, and there's a link in there if you're more interested in, I mean, that's more of like the technical program link. But for the teachers, it's really around on the workstation being able to actively see like the screens and see what students are doing, where they are. The benefit of that is that there is the ability for a keen eye to be able to track certain things, especially if there's concern. I think the challenge to that is that typically with very strong teaching, you don't sit in one spot and you're not constantly on the screen. So there is a cost-benefit analysis of the monitoring piece, which is that you want to make sure that monitoring is appropriate, but also that it's not hampering strong instructional practice around the room. So that's Lightspeed Relay is the application that we use for that. And then for the families, and we need to get a new, we realize we need to get a, I need to get a new letter out to everyone, but Go Guardian is accessible to the parent community to be able to monitor and track usage of students, you know, from a parent perspective. So that is something that we have available. We did put something out more formally last year, and we can certainly do that again. And then letting go of resources, I thought, I mean, they were all really great questions. I also wanted to show a little bit of how we made some decisions. So the pandemic really, I feel like I'll toggle back and forth. The pandemic really pushed us to take on software applications and be thinking about what students needed in order for the learning to continue uninterrupted. And you know, as things were starting to kind of settle a bit more and thinking about which are the things that we want to keep and why, and which are the things that we were ready to graduate from, surveying was a big part of some of that decision-making. Conversations with the principals and with teachers, very important. So.
Just grab the handheld. Or no, don't go to the podium, just grab the handheld, bring it over.
Oh, it's handheld.
Yeah, back to feedback, Patrick. Well, that's, yeah.
I didn't know it was handheld, yeah. Might as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Thank you.
She's,
So this is an example of how we were trying to gauge, you know, what to keep, what to let go, and one of the best ways to do that is ask the people that are closest to the work. So this is a survey that went out at one point. I don't have an exact date, but basically people completed the survey. So they were thinking about their building, what grade they worked in. It was anonymous on purpose. I find that often that's the best way to get really authentic feedback without worry of anything. Not that we ever want anyone to operate from a space of worry, but I find that there's an authenticity when there's anonymous feedback that's incredibly helpful. So this was an anonymous survey, but it was grade specific, building specific, because there might be reasons to keep something in one grade and not more universally, and that opened the door to go back and have some additional conversations. But basically this is a list of all of the different applications that we brought on, which resources to use, how often do you use them, and so looking at across the week, and remember that this is during more of the height of the pandemic as we were making decisions. So there is definitely not an expectation that any of these is now being used 10 plus hours weekly. So I had to give that caveat. But really thinking about these applications, and then thinking about the G Suite resources being used, sharing some additional comments you may have. And so that was then used to go back. And then we got some information. And so this, I'm just putting up one snapshot of, you know, looking at some of the responses that came through. So in one case, we had 80 respondents. And I just want to draw your attention to Screencastify and Edgenuity courseware and Odysseyware and IXL. And I want to draw your attention to a lot of blue, which was showing that people weren't really using it. So we did not renew those applications. In some cases, through conversations with a team coordinator or with the building principal, you know, we talked about, even though it was a small group of people using it, that it was a mighty reason they were using it for. And so we made some decisions to keep certain things. So Achieve 3000 is an example of that, which is being used for intervention and enrichment in ELA in the middle school, so to extend some of the student learning. So we did decide to keep that. It's really specific to a targeted group of learners who really needs that particular software. And then I will turn it over to Maureen for financial considerations, and then I'll circle back. And again, this is just a preliminary toe in the water, but we'll have some more discussions about things that are resonating with you and any questions you may have.
So this is working, right? So tonight, just based on what Melissa shared, a lot of the decisions on how what ends up becoming part of the budget is looking at usage and kind of looking at each year over year. The last few years, I think you understand that our technology budget has seen significant growth. Currently, our current budget, we're slotted, and this is in the total area of technology, which also includes software, just like management software on the student side, is about $1.3 million. Much of the money, just to kind of, as we look at the technology budget, this is a reminder, what Melissa really focused on tonight, which was the learning resources and the devices, that accounts for roughly, depending on what is needed in a given year, maybe about $200,000 or $250,000 of the total, because the majority of the money is really spent. I mean, and I'm going to include Wi-Fi as just like a given, not so much as that's a decision, is really our infrastructure. The majority of the money is spent in just actually the closets, the actual local area network, and in just ensuring that that is functioning and up to speed in a lot of the softwares that we need for student management and attendance and those type of items, that the bulk of the dollars is spent there. Where we do, where we have some decision-making over is some of what Melissa shared, is what are the instructional resources that are being either funded each year. In addition to that, the other piece, again, that not so much will be flushed out this evening, but as we get into our budget deliberations, what I actually, hearing what Melissa said tonight, we did a very large investment in devices during the pandemic. Thankfully, much of those devices we did receive funding back with pandemic funds that we were able to reimburse ourselves. We went from really having a one-to-one Chromebook initiative at our high school exclusively to that being moved right down through the system. As we look at the numbers tonight, I mean, as I'm looking at them, I'm thinking we would, if we're only using them a half hour in certain places, like that wouldn't warrant, you know, the hundreds and hundreds of, at Hillside alone, they went from, I think, having 4 Chromebook carts a few years ago to having about 650 devices that were being requested, you know, by the building. So I think as we're really getting down into how technology is being used, we can also be more thoughtful about like those type of purchases, because that is something, as we know, after this pandemic goes on, is that going to be like the new norm, like having, you know, providing devices. So I'm not really going to speak that much tonight. I just wanted to kind of remind people what our technology budget is. This will be an area in which, when we get into our deeper budget discussions, we're really going to get into the nuts and bolts of those dollars. And as I mentioned, much of it is really just infrastructure, having redundancy, having a system that also we have a mirror of our internal closets are being housed elsewhere, just things that are compliance. Like, so the majority of the money, a good amount of the money that at least we spend in our technology purchases is not for devices, but it's more for like needed infrastructure. So, like again, as we break into those numbers a little bit more in the future, and give you kind of like the flavor for what each of those numbers are, just for this evening's purposes, I just wanted to kind of reflect that, as, you know, it's a big budget, but not much of it is really, I mean, a good amount, but not the significant portion of it is, for just the operation of the system, and it's, you know, fewer dollars are being spent. And as you can see, Melissa does try to at least ensure that there's some thinking behind us, because there's things we've either purchased, or then this year, many of the renewals we didn't end up doing. But, you know, technology is quite expensive. So that's all, yeah.
And some we added, so the diagnostic screeners, so the STAR Renaissance. I mean, I think that, you know, I want to make sure that I'm also communicating to the board that there are some very deliberate moves to introduce technology in a way that's going to be very meaningful, thinking about our program, thinking about individual students, thinking about trends, so that we can use data very quickly and formatively. So if you can imagine a class of, you know, a group of 24 children in a space together, it's far more efficient and effective to see trends very quickly in terms of performance, that it's there, and you can say, okay, wow, a quarter of my class is not, you know, there yet, so that's got to be something that I need to look at. Or, wow, this student is ready for this next instructional move, where if that was done paper pencil, it would take a very long time to collate all of that. So, you know, and I think there's good reason to do that too. So I was very cautious, even in presenting to you this evening, to make sure that we're coming to you with data, right? Some feedback directly from the classrooms. And I'm also incredibly aware that the teachers are doing an online Portrait of a Hastings Learner survey right now. So I was very deliberate and purposeful to make sure there was discussions in terms of collecting that data, which then, you know, required making grids and collating things and finding themes. And again, it's really about purpose. So how are you using the tech, and why are you using it or not using it? and we want to continue to support educators in making those decisions. And I know that there's a real commitment to wanting to make sure students are engaged and using technology in a way that's engaging and more innovative. And of course, this is like everywhere, a work in process. So.
I just wanted to make one more mention about the devices. Some of the thinking when we decided to have the one-to-ones, but the computer-based testing we thought was going to be, they pushed back the date. So there was a time we also were preparing for the implementation of that, and then the timing of that changed this year. They pushed it out 2 years. So that was also part of the thinking why we needed to have them across the board.
Yeah, I have a, sorry. Okay, thank you.
You got it.
I thank you so much. This was very informative, and I have a couple of follow-up questions and one suggestion. So I think I'll say it backwards. So, sorry, you can't hear me? Is it better? Okay. So I would say that obviously educational technology is needed. There's no two ways about it. I mean, in the colleges, which I'm familiar with, that's the in thing. Independent learning goes through all of that. So I get that rationale. Also, I get the rationale that we save the trees, which literally we are in trouble. I mean, we are saving paper, we are saving pencil, so it's all green. So I get that. But there's also there's this catch-22 that we all know it's real, which is that with K-12, with students in that age group, the device can be a distraction to a whole lot of progress. So in terms of I think that's a worry that I hear from parents, not because it's not something that is a necessary move. So my big ask is that I know some of these softwares can work offline, because some of these concern is that whilst, like you were saying, whilst you have the computer open, then you browse you browse elsewhere. So I mean, I know that for our students here, they are more matured, and you don't need to not give them access to internet because they have to check for resources, and they need the website. But the middle school or even the elementary school, can some of these software, the same way we came to school with books, this is the book. Can these softwares that they need for instruction be within the computer in such a way that they cannot browse? Like, I know Google, you can work on a lot of their forms offline, right? That way, because what I hear from parents in the community is this whole browsing situation.
Yeah, let me just jump in, because I've been at this over a decade in 3 different districts, all very frankly high-powered, Weston, 99% go to 4-year here, you're right there. Greenwich is a more diverse place, a little different. I'm going to be really simple. I think there's a lot of validity in what was reported back to Melissa. My walkabout suggests what was said here. And for example, the investment in smart boards and whiteboards that's expensive, but exactly right. Because I don't walk into a high school classroom. So if the board, I'm just going to be bold. If the board says we want lectures and we don't want devices, your teachers lecture a lot here, and they use the whiteboards and smart boards to make them very interactive. I mean, I've been in so many of the classrooms. So I think that investment's smart. Coming at you on the mandated required grade 3 through 8 online testing, like it or not, we got to gear up for that, because I've led through 2 districts in Connecticut through that, and I know all the horror stories in those 2 districts when we were not ready when the state mandated it. And like it or not, that's a device investment. It's an infrastructure investment. It's getting ready for that. So that's going to be a decision for you as to the devices. I think, Hastings, what I'm hearing is you're settling into a nice balance here of how much you're actually on this versus how much it's a resource to be drawn on. And if some fine tuning in terms of investment can be made on that However, with this required online testing from the state coming at us, it's not even be simple. Grades 3 through 8, if our children are not ready to operate in a device they know when they take that, Hastings is calm on tests, but if results start going down because of not being facile in this, I know what you're gonna hit. You're gonna hit some very upset families. So it's trying to balance out that access to device, but you've already settled into, I think, what sounds like a reasonable use. So now to go exactly to your question, Dr. Lang, how do we support teachers? Some of it's, the device management, but how do you support them if you have the children on there? I'm used to use children. I got older children here. But children, how do you help them not wander all over the place?
Correct.
Because the gains of having minimal access is what we're hearing. Because it's, to what you get with this, it far outpaces. So then it's trying to, how do we support, let's identify the problem.
Yeah.
I don't think the problem is having these up and open.
No.
I think then it's a different problem we have to figure out.
Yeah, so I agree with you 100%. I mean, what can you do when you, and that's what I said. I'm saying that we are saving the trees by using this. My specific ask is, and the specific problem that I hear being shared is the wandering away from the coursework. Like I said, the adults know what to do. But middle schoolers and elementary schoolers, they are going to YouTube, they are looking at other things. There's so much the teacher can do. So do we need to have, do we need to give access?
I would suggest we better understand that. I think it's a great question for us to probe more deeply.
Exactly, that's what I'm at. Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
I'm a parent. I'm gonna use my parent hat. I got a 3rd grader, a 9th grader, and I got a guy in college and out of college. I know how much they wander all over the place.
Correct.
But I also know how much they tell us they're wandering in schools and they're not wandering.
Yeah.
So I think we gotta, I agree totally as a parent with the question. I think we gotta know the answer though before we go charging in with a solution.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Got it.
I agree, and it makes me wonder too, right? So I think, what I've been hearing is around, some of the questions that we posed at the table were around filtering and monitoring and supervising.
Correct.
And for me, it's maybe a different question, which is like, what is the moment of deep engagement, right? Like, how do we enhance the engagement of the learning activity, for example, that will overshadow the desire to want to browse? Like, so how do we navigate that, perhaps? Like, I feel like the first step is to probe more deeply, as Dr. McCursey said, about off-task device use. Like, what is actually, what are teachers experiencing in the classroom? Are they seeing that as a big challenge? Are they aware of it? Are children reporting that that's a thing? And I'm sure it's happening, but perhaps not to the extent that it is, being wondered about. And then the second is exactly like, what's the problem that we're solving if it is happening? Is it around engagement? Is it around supervision and monitoring? Is it around, right? So I think we still have some questions around that.
Okay, so my second, again, I just don't want that concern to be belittled. And if I would ask,
That's a great question.
if I would ask, if the second part to this is that with shutting, even we give online tests to students and we shut the computer in such a way that they can't, I've forgotten the term, so that they can't browse. So it's not that it cannot be done. But I think that we should look into it. Let's see whether it's legit to begin with, like Dr. Marchesi said, and look into it, because I know that has been the concern, not because we want Stone Age students, so to speak. So my second part, which you actually alluded to, was the interaction piece, because so there is the engagement, and engagement is really like, okay, how do you define it? Everybody's style is different. But my concern, which is really, I'm not sure how to define this, but social interaction is necessary for holistic growth. And so I get the device part, and psychologists have done work on it. I'm not a psychologist, but my colleagues have done work on this piece. Even with a lot of the mental health, I mean, instead of naming the pandemic physical distance, we call it social distance, and then it wasn't healthy in that regard of socially distanced, and we are social animals. So my thing is how you talked about the use, and this is right in your lab. What specific professional development practices is going to go into an interaction, not necessarily based on the tool, because it depends on the work they are doing, but based on the human social interaction that is needed as a form of engagement to a holistic training of our kids. So it's not literally technology, but it's important because technology seems to take away that. That's what I'm trying to say. So yeah, thank you.
If I could pick up on something you mentioned, because there's sort of a conundrum here. On a fundamental level, we have New York State that has said these are the standards, which are quite significant, that we have to implement. So, and I think everybody agrees if we say that there are digital fluency standards, it sounds like a good idea. But on the other side, sort of what you're touching on, that is if we said, you know what, we're going to have, in addition to, we're going to have analog fluency standards, people will be like, well, that's a good idea also, you know, and that's sort of the conundrum for me. It's that, you know, what do you lose in that translation where things go digital? And, you know, beyond filtering, I'm just saying fundamentally, you know, there's a famous, British Austrian philosopher who said the limits of my language are the limits of my world, and mean the limits of my world. And when you interact and do things digitally, you're not doing them in an analog fashion. And what kind of constraint does that put upon you? Like, for example, I noted ruefully that Keyboards Without Tears is from the same company that did handwriting without tears, right? Do we still do the kids still learn cursive? When are they learning that?
I believe it's 3rd grade into 4th.
So, Gus, I see a look there. Do you, when you guys take notes, do you write in cursive?
I can barely write at all.
I mean, it's a really good,
Yeah.
it's a really good question. It's a national question.
Yeah.
It's an international question.
Yeah.
It's international.
So as we've looked at learning outcomes and the amount of time you have, you know, there's been a pullback on some of those, what might be considered the basics of the basics. To say, you know, how much time you spend with, you know, getting the writing right as opposed to really understanding, getting truly literate and, you know, numeric and all the rest. So Hastings may say, let's be bold, but you're going to have to pull back on something. If you want more work on cursive and handwriting, which could be a good thing, you're going to have to pull back on something else.
Yeah.
And so that, I just
Right,
want
not to make
put
it
in
just-
context. I'm being neutral on it.
No, for sure, but just to look at the issue.
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
Gus, I understand you don't have good handwriting. Eliana, if I could ask you, do you write in cursive when you take notes? No. Okay.
I write in my own
Way.
I learn my own language. I can't read it, but
Yeah, that's a good way to learn.
Okay, that's right. I would just note, without revealing anyone's identity, there's a child who lives in my house who can neither write script nor read it.
Right.
So, you know,
So I will say, you know, I remember coming here, and one of the first discussions I had before I even started was with a team leader who was asking, like, immediately, like, what the handwriting program was going to be. So I don't think we had, you know, I'm looking at the two of you, moving through the system, like, at that time, I don't think it was there yet, right? Like, so thinking about how we even have.
You are correct. There was a gap where cursive wasn't being taught.
Right.
It was reintroduced
Yeah,
at 3rd
it was
grade.
my first
So
foray
asking a
in.
senior's not fair.
Yeah, it was actually, I needed to mention it because I'm laughing, because I remember
Oh, they do
that was one of my entry interviews as part of my entry plan. Like, that was the first thing that was asked, like, how can you help us with this? Like, that was like immediate on the horizon. So I remembered working towards that. But anyway.
which is all to say that, like, you know, that analog side of things, it doesn't have to, you know, I mean, we need digital fluency, even just from a NICET perspective. But it's a thing maybe in the portrait process that we need to consider, you know, that other side of the coin, because it's, you know, it's very significant, so.
Can I
Right.
just, are you done? Sorry. I just want to make a bigger point about the presentation and what I'm trying to look for and understand. So, you know, I feel like the presentation, while good, was more about the details. I'm looking more about the macro lens. So, I'm looking at all the notes that I was taking. So, we know that there are studies that show that computers inhibit creative thinking and movement and attention spans in particular, right? And one of the things that I mentioned last time is my concern with the cumulative effect of technology use. It's 10 minutes here, it's the whole class there, it's this, so it's not just, it makes it sound smaller than it is. But I think that we need to use things with strong evidence of benefit. Like, where are the studies that show how using this software leads to better results? So we know that it's true, that it leads to better results. That when they do their classes and they're doing their ELA on the computer, where does it show that? And I think that we and the community should have access to these studies that show here, this is not a study done by the person who's supplying the software. But if there's possible to have this data that we can, because maybe I'm misunderstanding, but from the New York State Computer Science and Digital Fluency Learning Standards, the 5 concept areas, it wasn't about leveraging technology. It's about understanding technology and learning about technology, not using technology to learn math. If you maybe that's just my way of understanding it, but it was how do we be safe online? How do you write code? How do you do this? It's not using math to learn, using a computer to learn math is supplying the answer to this concept. We don't have to get into it today if you don't want to, but that for me is what that the literacy is. And I have the same question about the controls in the classrooms, because I've witnessed it myself. And then I'm also curious, page 22, you show where they're not using it anymore, what they don't need. But it would be interesting to see the charts of all of the other ones as well, to see if the charts measure up with what they're self-reporting as the usage of the technology in schools. So I guess what I'm looking for really is the broader picture, and maybe this comes out with the portrait of a learner, but I don't think we can have the portrait of a learner results without the data and the studies behind it. I'm not saying that we should go to no technology, of course not, and I think that it's necessary and that there can be ways to use it, but when you have when a student has their computer up, I mean, it's a physical barrier between them and the teacher. They're not looking at their teacher, they're looking down.
So,
So my question in general is the bigger picture story.
So I think it's a very clear question, a very good one, and we can definitely go back. It won't be the next 2 weeks.
No, I understand. It's a bigger question.
And it's peer-reviewed independent research.
Correct.
Yes.
There's a lot of peer-reviewed independent research that's going to actually settle where Hastings is. Hastings, this is actually a good moment, because if it's valid that only 25% of the time the devices are up, you should feel good about that, as opposed to larger.
Totally.
And it's been validated. That was a cold call.
Yeah.
That was not a setup. When Melissa turned over, because I can assure you, Gus and I, we're not talking.
Oh, no, I didn't
that was
plan
a total
that. Sorry, I
How does this compare and line up? So I think Dennis is saying, when it is the 25%, what's actually going on?
Yeah.
Are we controlling it? Are we managing the wandering, the off-task stuff?
Yeah.
Humans are brilliant about going off task.
Yeah.
If I have a device or not, I'm doodling, I'm doing something else, I'm going off task. So the question is, it's not just the device, right? So then how do we manage that? How do we connect that? But I think more generally, we can bring you research that would show very clearly independent, research-based, peer-reviewed, which is the key. Peer-reviewed, that in a kind of balanced, blended approach, which you've gotten here in Hastings either by design, remember I wasn't here, either by design or you backed into it. You kind of are getting close to that optimal point. We can bring you that research and have that conversation, because you're exactly right. Big view, what are we getting, what's the value, and how do we tweak that a bit? And my hunch is, and I'll be, to be really succinct, my hunch is going to come down to actually a few specifics. How do you help children manage their time when the devices are up? How do you help teachers manage a room when 24 devices are up to keep it focused? The best of probably what you're seeing in the high school, how much of that can walk back down into middle school, and stylistically and methods. So
because that seems to answer the question about what the state is looking for,
Yeah.
is best practices
Right.
for digital learning. Because, to your point about, humans get distracted 100%, but studies show that doodling is actually your brain working to be creative and to work through problems, and that it's actually good to sit, and everybody has their own doodle style, or used to.
Well,
You always knew your friends doodle because you'd see it like they're making boxes or they're making curlicues. Attention span going to Amazon and sending your mother an email about what you want her to buy for you is an entirely different way of not, that speaks to what I was saying before about the creative thinking.
I really appreciate the,
And if I may say, but I think, I'm putting my parent hat on. Once we clarify that, that's where it's a shared deal. Because if Riona or Arbella texted me in the middle of the day, I gotta talk to them later to say, I don't wanna get that.
Right.
I don't want that, you're right? And I think that's where, when we get a better handle on how much wandering's going on from within the school day, we owe it to parents to help see that, and then what are the mechanisms, and to say, hey, here's where we need some help, is that,
Yeah,
is that
totally.
fair?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and my one last point that I'd like to have an understanding of, because when you ask the teachers, I think it's helpful, is homework. Because homework, I think, is when, these guys could probably answer how much of their homework they do on the computer. Because that's also when kids get distracted, and when the distraction at home is when their computer use goes up and their screen time goes up. Because they'll tell you they're doing their homework, but they're really doing something else. And so, again, I'm just thinking about the cumulative effect of screen time on creativity and distraction in children. And if you have to do all of your homework on your computer, then that just adds to. So it's not just during the day we're talking about, but it's what's brought back home again. Do you do all your homework on computers?
I'd say probably do about 50%.
And that's like, for you, it's probably a few hours at night, right? Right. So you're staring at a screen for, you're awake for what? However many hours a day you're awake, and you're staring at a screen for probably a lot of that. I'm not trying to say that we can get away from that. I understand it's the world we're in. I'm just trying to help our kids as much as possible before. The addiction, I'm sure we all see the addiction, and as much as we can help our children, that's what I'm trying to do.
yeah, I actually I appreciate the comments, and what I can say is, you're definitely speaking my language, especially around that peer-reviewed research piece. Like, I feel like that's something that is very important to me in terms of moving any kind of work forward. And even when we took on Dreambox, for example, as a supplemental, like a differentiation for students, like Center for Education Policy Research out of Harvard actually did a study, and I like looking at that to say Dreambox progress measure was positively associated with achievement gains on different assessments, like that they've done studies on this. So we are speaking the same language and making sure that, like, even from a macro level, not just on, and I gave an example of an independent adoption of a resource, right? Making sure that that was grounded in research. But I love the idea of just having some access to peer-reviewed research and looking at what the research is saying as best practice, in addition to the fact that, we do have this imperative from the state. So that is a piece of that. And, the only way that you can learn and know something very deeply is to actually experience it and engage with it rather than to just hear about it. But to your point, I think the balance is incredibly important. We want to make sure that we're being responsible, and we do want to make sure that we're using data and research to inform our practices and stay relational, of course, but, that there is some deeper information that's guiding us in making some decisions.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments? Dr. Smansky and Maureen, thank you very much for
Thanks.
putting that together.
And I just want to say thank you to all of the people who gave feedback, too. That's really helpful.
Can I just ask, are you texting and emailing with your partner?
I forgot to say one thing after the audit report. That's why.
Take the fifth.
Yeah. Excuse me, are your friends doing that?
Yeah, they're interrupting you. Right.
I mean, I can, it depends on the class. If I'm in a class where I can go home and learn the stuff by myself, and half the time, because you're talking about it, I will absolutely be playing stupid game on my computer if I can get away from it. That hasn't happened in the last 2 years because once you get to those higher level classes, like what's going on is really engaging and you need to stay on top of it. Yeah, I think that happens all the time, especially in middle school. In the first 2 years of high school, that was a constant. People were always on their computers. There was always a fight between teachers and the students. That kid in the back of the class who just would refuse to put the Chromebook down and just stop playing Doodle Jump or whatever on their computer. So that's definitely a thing.
Jeremy.
You talk about Jeremy?
Right. I wanted to just point out something. We all have our computers open right now, but we are very engaged. And we are looking, so like when you were talking about, you have we're on board docs together and looking at the agenda and what we need to do and all of that. That is a good use of technology because we are still engaged and we are still connected. So I feel like, but I don't know. I feel like we have to create that kind of environment for our kids, especially when they may not have, I'm not talking about the adult kids, but I'm talking about middle schoolers. We just have to be real. Where if you are reprimanding them, it may look something else from elementary, right? So for me, it's the middle schoolers I'm talking about. I have to be just direct because that's the age group where you just have to help them, not tempt them, but help them do what they got to do. And that's why for me the browsing part is important. I personally,
and that's
it's
where
important.
the teaching of those under the learning about technology comes into play. Is like helping them understand that are our teachers prepared to do that? It's hard, like teaching them how to do it. You have to teach kids how to study. No one knows how to study necessarily. Like you have to teach them how to do these things, and I don't know whose job that would be, but in the classroom, I think rather than just yelling at them, shut the thing, but like, here's how you use a computer effectively.
And also that impulse control piece.
I would, for you as a board, at the end of each meeting, we look at the agenda and what the agenda priority for you is. And you heard me a couple meetings ago. You have very few areas. You've got limited energy, so you got to prioritize in here. What is you want to focus on? I would suggest this is an area to keep focused on because the timing is right. So a lot of districts, and I was lucky to be part of a couple, got way out in front on this topic. Then COVID showed up, and all bets were off, but also you had to be proficient and well, or you would have been no school. And we are sitting in a region where, on average, we did much better than the rest of the nation. And a lot of that, you can go to districts where they were ready digitally. But now's a good time to question, do we need as much as we have? How are we thinking about it? And it cuts to the core of so much, right? And there's not a sibling, sister, brother, parent, uncle, aunt sitting here who isn't worried about the amount of time we're on these things, right? And how it's shaping how we operate as a country, just small d democracy, right? So it's the exact questions to be asked.
Right.
And I think, to do it a research-based way, a thoughtful way. So I really want to thank Melissa for listening to you, sprinting out to get information, and thank the busy teachers and others who in the middle of everything said, we'll get some data back today. So we could start this conversation, and please hear start this conversation. It was exactly right in Hastings to dig into this.
Yeah, and thank you really very much, guys, for being honest about it, because there's no way we can change things if you're trying to impress us with the answers, what you think we want to hear. So I appreciate you guys really being honest about what's actually happening.
Yeah, Gus just disagreed with me. It was great.
Wait, I did?
You said.
No, I didn't.
He said, kids are on their devices too much. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
Well done, sir.
Right. Yeah.
Which is a perfect segue into our student reports.
Yes.
So, whoever wants to go first. Beth, you want to start? Yeah.
Okay. So actually, the reason why that took me so long is my computer was off. I had to get it restarted. Not playing right now.
Sure. Well played.
So just first off, I wanted to congratulate Emma Letty for being nominated as LoHUD's Player of the Week. Emma's captain on the field hockey team. Who scored twice at Hastings' 5-0 win over Albertus Magnus and made 4 assists against Bronxville. As of right now, the field hockey team has won 9 games, lost 2, and tied 1. So they're currently ranked first in the section, which is super exciting. The girls cross country team won the Woodlands Extravaganza meet. There are about 20 teams there, give or take. And Hastings runners actually placed first in both the girls and boys varsity races. Ms. Shandroff's science research juniors are currently designing at-home experiments to hone the skills that they'll be using next year in competitions and when they design their research projects. The seniors are prepping for the Regeneron Science Talent Search, which is the biggest science competition in the country. We'll be submitting our applications to that on November 9th. Right now, thanks to the guidance office, seniors and juniors are lucky enough to be going to a bunch of different college and university visits, as well as different visits from some programs for after college. So some of the highlights in the last month or so have been visits from Northwestern, the United States Army, and SUNY Binghamton. Project Share's second midnight run of the year was a massive success. It was last Saturday night. For the first time since COVID, significant numbers of freshmen were able to make it. Brought down food, closed the toiletries, and we're starting to gear up for the annual Thanksgiving dinner for the homeless. It's going to be held in the Cochran Gym for the first time since COVID, and we're aggressively fundraising and planning a school-wide assembly that will take place at 11 o'clock on November 2nd for the entire school.
The school plays coming up October 21st and 22nd. Everybody can expect to see you all there. The outsiders. Everyone is so excited. Excited that we got masks on stage. The set was constructed yesterday. Looks really cool. I recommend checking it out in the auditorium. Because we now have BOE Meeting this year for the first time, in the playbills, every cast member and crew member will have a bio and a photo in the playbill.
Yeah.
Fancy.
Senior Julian Anselin was selected as New York State's Young Birder of the Year and last weekend in Albany received the award. To add on to the sports, although we did not win our last home game, football game this past Friday, we did make an impressive touchdown in the last few moments of the game. And we honored the senior football players and Hudsonettes, giving each of them a flower to the senior game. And it was exciting for all the spectators to watch some real Friday night lights. Everyone's favorite early school year activity, Picture Day, was a few weeks ago. The makeups are October 21st. On October 26th, the juniors will be going on a day trip, a history trip to Philadelphia. Dr. McPherson knows about that. It used to be a tradition before COVID, but COVID shut everything down. Seeing various landmarks like Liberty Dome. Junior formal set November 7th. The student planning committee has already made plans for much of the decor, the food, the activities, under the theme Starlit City. Fancy. And finally, Safe Rides is back. Safe Rides is a free car service that runs in Hastings Fridays and Saturdays from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. It's funded by the Hastings City Council, and it's designed to act as reliable local transportation that teens can use if they ever need a ride home on a weekend night. It was shut down again because of COVID, but the SAD Club is enthusiastically making chains for the numbers on them for Christmas students.
So that's how you get they place a phone call? Okay. Do you know who the drivers are?
The driver is the same lady that has done it.
Mrs. Mace, Mrs. Mace.
Yes.
Yeah, Miss Mace. She works for the school district also.
Yes, the car broke down, and that's why it was delayed to come back. But it was fixed. We had the car.
All right, excellent.
no matinee on Sunday?
Matinee.
Okay, well, sometimes there's a matinee on Sunday. Right. Right, I'm allowed to go. Eliana said she expects to see me there.
Friday, Saturday, 7 p.m.
Yeah. And I'm very excited for you guys to go to Philadelphia. It's gonna be super fun.
That's good. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you both very much. We're going into business items, so if you
But-
guys want to,
Can I just mention one thing that I was supposed to put in the agenda, but I didn't, and it's just something I want to put on your radar that I can bring back to you next week. But Governor Hochul, in the last month, signed into law the opportunity for local districts and municipalities to adopt an increase for the income limits for senior citizens. And what this is really allowing is a further tax break for senior citizens that fall within a now increased range of income. That, as an example, the current, this is in addition to Senior Star, just to be clear. So there's the Senior Star that provides tax relief for seniors in our district and others. And then in addition to that, we currently participate in another way for seniors to get a reduction in their taxes if their income falls between $29,000 to $38,000. Those numbers have been the same for 15 years, and they're not set by us, they're set by the state. The state now has just very, in the last few weeks, has now put into law the ability for schools to increase those amounts to allow those exemptions up to, it's about almost $60,000. Now, some districts, because we're not clear, or I don't think the town of Greenberg, that is our taxing authority, my understanding is they're not going to be able to provide us the information. They don't have that information readily available to say, well, if you were to adopt this, it's going to, because any reduction to the seniors then, shifts to the remainder of the tax base, similar to the veterans exemptions we provide. So I have to think there would be, a number of people that may provide an additional, and it could be in some situations, could be up to a 50% reduction in their school taxes. So the tough part about this is that in order to have this actually, our residents to be able to participate in this, districts have to make that decision by November. And I literally just because this was something the governor put into place, kicked it to the towns. The towns sent us the information. Next week, I'm going to provide you what those look like, but I know some other districts that you're not required to do it, and some districts are not going to do it because they're not sure about what the impact, they don't have the information to say, oh, this is, that'll be, 500 people that would qualify. We do know in districts like ours that many of our homeowners are senior citizens, but this would be I know it's a tough thing, but the board does have to, decide whether this is something you want to entertain, and then, but without maybe having the exact dollar amounts.
would there be another opportunity next November, or is this is the one time?
I think it would be for this upcoming year. I think once you don't do it, then you're just a year behind. So, and unlike the veterans, what I've read thus far, and I'll provide, because again, this came through an email, and then I was able to kind of pull out information and then trying to see what other people are doing. When we did the veterans exemption, as an example, at least for the most part, we had the dollars in which the impact or where the shifts would occur, right? So if we adopt this is, and there was different levels we could adopt it at, and we made the decision based upon what we felt comfortable at that time, adopting. I would imagine that once this goes into law, that each year you would have the opportunity to consider opting in. That would be similar to the veterans exemptions. For this time frame for this year is a short time frame, and we may not have all the information, but I will try to see if there is anything they can provide. Sometimes they may not even have it themselves, because if the people that they only are collecting, which makes sense, on the people that are at the current threshold, so they don't know who may fall into that other $30,000 threshold. Sure.
The decision is to opt into this raise of increasing the 60K threshold from mid-30s.
Yes.
But we don't know how many people that.
Exactly. Yes.
And then the burden shifts to.
The remainder of the taxpayers. Yeah, so it would bring, so just as an example, that if you were at the upper level, so the exemption is based, if up to $50,000.99, if your income were below that, you would get 50% off your taxes. You know, and currently that is not the case. You get nothing, you know? And then it tiers down, so at 50,000, and again, I'll share all this information, 50,000 to 51,000, you get 45% break. I mean, my guess is I know we have a number of people who qualify for Senior Star. Now, just using those numbers, they're a little bit higher, the income thresholds, but we have a significant amount of people who do receive that, which is it's about 2 times what everybody else who qualifies for Star receives. So that income threshold, if you're a senior and you make over 70,000 or 60,000, you do not qualify for senior. Similar to, there's income limits on regular Star, right?
Yeah.
Like we know what they are. So, my guess is that we would have, you know, based upon the fact that we have a good amount of people who are qualified for the other, I think that we would have possibly a good chunk of, you know, people who would be qualified. I mean, when I say chunk, you know, could be 100, 200 households. Where currently, I think currently maybe like, believe it or not, it's still like 60 or 70 like households that qualify. And the other piece with any of these Senior Stars, just as a, it includes if you had like family members living in there, you wouldn't qualify. So we have, well, if we know of them, and the only way we know if they have extended family is we get the list and we check it against, if you're a grandparent and you have your son and their family living with you, you would not, if we wouldn't, they check with us. That's the only way they would know if there's more income in the house.
Okay. So
And
it's definitely, it's something to keep our eye on, but there's a lot of complexity.
yeah,
built in.
so I mean, it's tricky, and I'm not gonna speak for other districts, but just in what I've received, I know not all the river towns are even looking at this. I mean, just as, I know other districts are. I think because it's so new and people do not know what the income, and because I think with the reassessment, again, this year, knowing that different people already got hits at different points, this would potentially shift more burden. But I also understand it gives the relief to the seniors, so.
Okay.
So, but anyway. It actually says this the town, in order to have this, be available to those senior citizens, would have to be, they said something like mid-November, they would need our adopted resolution from the Board of Education sent to them. Month, yeah.
I think we should bring you some thoughts on it at the next meeting.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
We should bring a,
Yeah.
kind
So the
of,
board
at the
makes
next
the
meeting,
decision?
just to,
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, I mean, there's obviously no vote happening tonight, but I
Yeah.
think some boards are even saying, right now, we don't even think we're not gonna have the information not to bring it, yeah,
yeah, we can put on the agenda.
yeah.
Okay. So, thank you very much, Maureen.
What's
So
our
moving on to
November
business
meeting?
items, are there any questions
concern
or
is that it has
comments
to be
on
adopted by
items
next
1 through 9?
We're skipping public comment. for
Oh, I'm
all
sorry.
this.
Yes, that's true. If there's any public comment, but there's nobody present, so I'm sorry, I skipped over that. So yes, going back to business items, are there any questions or comments on business items 1 through 9?
So I have a question about the number 1, the facing history of ourselves, teaching for equity and justice.
Yep.
So is that's professional development?
It is, and it's actually being funded, I realized that the cover memo didn't indicate, it's being funded by HEF through
Oh,
grant.
okay.
So this will be at no cost to the district, and what ends up happening is we, should the board approve, then it gets put into motion, then the grant money comes through HEF. It is PD, it's specific to ELA, social studies teachers, inclusive of special educators, E&L providers, and some administrators. We're starting at the high school level. Logistically, we had originally intended to go middle and high. There was impact in terms of having a long enough runway to get everyone together at the same time, because we had to shift the calendar. We did the 3 superintendents conferences early, and our partner wasn't available to do it then, but we were able to partner with, and I'd like to really recognize and thank Josh Blum, Greg Smith, Lou at Pietro was heavily involved with Janice, how do we reconfigure this to still make it happen? And they were able to do that, so we're starting at the high school level first.
In the class, in the high school, they already have a class in the English department, which
They do.
incorporates
They do, and
material, so this is just expanding out.
yes. So So one is more of like a focused course specifically on facing history. And the idea with this is the teaching for equity and justice is to be able to infuse across course content.
So my understanding is that it's very able to teach that course now for another.
Yes, yeah, yes, he's been teaching it. It's actually not only highly regarded, it's a heavily sought course. So we were, yeah. Yes. Thank you.
So is this, if we don't have to pay for it, is this just on there as like an FYI?
That's right. So what we do is we end up ultimately accepting the grant from HEF, but basically we work with whomever, like in this case, the vendors facing history. We put that through, and we work with them on the proposal and making sure that everything's accepted, that we're being transparent with the board and the community, that this is happening, and then HEF will then provide the funding.
Got it, okay. And then I just have another question about number 8, the proposal day automation. I'm just curious, if the kids know in the school, are they being told that there's cameras in the school? Do they understand
You can,
that?
I mean, yes, I think I can't say how they're notified of this, but I would say that it's general knowledge because they also see the security guards that have, although they can't necessarily see, I think most of the kids in passing by, they see that there's all the kind of hallways. And then also the cameras are relatively visible, like they're kind of, they're not.
But there's no like official privacy notices that kids have to sign about, I understand that I'm being filmed.
Well, I think there's two things. I think there's a policy that covers the use and how they can be used. Like for, they're really there for safety and security.
Yeah.
I know what I mean, even in terms of like, I know that, I think I don't have it in front of me, but I know there was a lot of discussion on board policy about when it would be appropriate to use the camera for like student discipline issues or just, if a kid said they were in the bathroom, they're like, go check the camera and see if they were, idling in the hallway. I think it's used only by certain people have access and only would not used for safety and security purely of like people not coming into our building, then they don't use it to like, see if a child was doing something in between, only if a serious.
But they do use it to go back. They do use it to go back and see if there was.
No, an investigation only, but I mean, it has to be, I think it,
Well, that's what I mean. I
Yeah.
wonder if kids understand that they're being
Yeah.
filmed, that Big Brother is watching.
Yeah, I know.
I'm wondering if this goes back to me to technology literacy.
Mhm.
Like, do you understand what the technology? Right, because in New York City you can't get away with anything.
Yeah.
There's cameras and
I mean,
security.
I wonder if the teachers may say,
Walking for 50 blocks in the city,
Yeah.
and look at a break in the corner.
Right.
You're not giving any permission.
Right.
Right.
But again, I think it goes back to this idea of literacy, that children should understand that there are cameras and they're
That's a
being
good
watched.
point.
And that's, it's not just here, it's in the world.
no, that is a good point.
So anyway, that's what I think it is, given that we were just having that discussion.
Oh, no. And there's no cameras within classrooms, just to be clear. The cameras are only in exit entrances. There's not, and only in, so only in hallways, so nothing even inside.
No, I know, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, again, like I said, it just goes back to the discussion we were just having about understanding technology.
No, it's true. Sometimes I forget they're there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a motion to approve? I'm sorry. Oh, of course.
It's a general one, if it takes us off track, for another time, but just kind of generally, how do we know these prices are good? Like, how do you lock into a vendor, like, for a shred? Like, how do I know what the average?
Wait, for what? For shredding?
Anything. Like a
Oh,
shredder.
sure, yes. So there's a couple things. So when we do purchases that the school makes, they have to fall into, we're required to either do our own bid, participate in a state bid. So that doesn't necessarily, so as an example, in most cases, it should be the best price because you're either buying in a cooperative bid, and a lot of these, like Xerox and some of those companies, we're accessing what is a state bid, so the state and schools with the state, send out a bid to get a better price by competitively bidding it in larger groups. I would say that on occasion, an item by item, occasionally people will say, Maureen, I know this is on bid, or we're buying this bid, but I found it, for $2 cheaper on Amazon or something. You could possibly, but I would say that the bid process, for the most part, should be ensuring that we're getting things at as good a rate as possible. And then we also, depending on what we're purchasing and if it's proprietary versus just kind of common, we do have multiple avenues to compare. So if we were buying like a printer for a classroom, the 3 or 4 vendors that are either on state bid or we have, or BOCES may have a contract with, that again is through a procurement process, we then would compare and contrast. And some of them will honor like the other number, like if you can demonstrate you can get it a few dollars cheaper. So, but I guess is there an occasion where something may be on Amazon, but we're really not, although a lot of people would prefer to buy everything on Amazon, we're not allowed to just use it. We do have to, for the most part, use the procurement process, so, yeah.
Good question.
Like a $3,000, like, toilet or something, with the government.
So is there a motion to approve business items 1 through 9?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Okay. Moving on to placement of services for CSE and CPSE. Is there a motion to approve the 2 items here?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor? Personnel. Should we do these? Oh, actually, let's do that. Is there a motion to approve appointments 1 through 6 in personnel?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Do you want it as a consent?
So, all in favor? And I wanted to pause to note the retirement. Maybe it's somebody. Were you going to speak first? I'm sorry. Carlos Castaneda, who has been with us for 38 years, as hard as it is to believe, is submitting his resignation, and which you see here before us. We're going to have some plans at the end of the year? Or?
Well, January 13th is his final day, and we definitely will set up some celebrations for him. There'll be a feature on the webpage shortly, photo, article, and also we're going to have at least one significant event, and the board itself might want to think of a way here at a meeting to honor Carlos. But he deserves it, and we want to do that. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, so, there are preparations underway to, both from a,
I'm sorry, I said I'm retiring.
Right.
Resigning for the purpose of retiring.
For the purpose of retiring.
Yeah.
But I think anybody who's been in this building a lot, and I was when I coached rec, and just he's sort of always around.
no, he's the man. He's it. Yeah.
And it's just I hope he feels the respect that he gets from all of us in the school, because like truly when a place feels cared for, the people that are in it feel cared for, and he plays a huge role in that. So I hope you find a good way.
He's our longest serving employee and
Okay.
historian of everything that's gone on here.
He's had such a long tenure with us, and particularly in recognition of how much the importance of maintenance of buildings
Oh, yeah.
really contributed to the safety not only of our students but our staff. It's oftentimes the people we don't necessarily see in our classrooms, but who help maintain and keep our facilities and school and whatnot clean, not only during dire emergencies, but on the day-to-day when people have the stomach flu and all kind of bugs that are going around, and keeping the bathrooms clean. We have a debt that we cannot repay to people like Mr. Castaneda.
Yes.
So I really, just as a parent of 3 kids who've gone through the system here, I know that he's always been eager to lend a hand, whether it's as Alex referred to with rec sports during the day, and his leadership I'm sure is also appreciated by the people who belong to his union and who he's represented steadfastly at this time here. So to Carlos, I just wanted to say thank you. Le agradezco mucho todo el trabajo que ha hecho todos los años que ha estado aquí.
So thank you very much. Is there a motion to approve Carlos's retirement? Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. Is there a motion to approve leave of absences? Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. Moving on to approval of minutes, is there a motion to approve the minutes from our 9:28 meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor? Moving on to policies from last meeting, these are second reads. How do we proceed here? Has there been, are these just the ones that were? We
Yeah,
had some
there,
updates that Susan.
yeah, there were at least 5 significant questions from the board regarding policy 103A. And so I had sent you by email today, and then it's been reproduced here in an actual memorandum to you from Suzanne Volpe, where she spoke to the 5 questions. I mean, my simple summary is that I think this does answer your questions. It does give clarity to allow you to decide this evening whether you do want to adopt this policy, and if you do, you would then simultaneously be committing to the required public hearing, which we then would schedule for you ahead of an upcoming meeting. Actually, I think that public hearing, is that before the final vote? It says right here, or is it, or you would vote tonight to adopt it, and then before you could implement, you'd have the public hearing on it.
Okay, so state law says that in order to have the virtual meetings, we have to first have an open public meeting to approve.
Yeah,
to
virtual,
approve our-
yeah, to allow that ability for a board member to participate via video conference.
Okay.
That's the shift here, is you'd be able to do that.
Okay.
And within the limits, be able to vote while you're at a distance.
Okay, so tonight we're voting to have that meeting and to adopt the regulations that would be
Yeah, the meeting is,
precipitate from that meeting.
right.
But if it's approved, okay.
Well, you're voting to adopt the policy, and then you have a public hearing on the policy.
Okay.
I have a question, Bill, about one of the points from the lawyer that
Yep.
should I ask that now or?
Sure, because this is your night to either table this or vote on it. Or vote.
I'm a little confused about, so under the caveat, under number 3,
Yep.
it says a physical location is any physical location for the meeting with a public and attendant person. And this is, I'm trying to understand if what she's saying is sorry.
Yeah,
Which point was this?
it's under 3, the caveat under 3.
Yeah.
I think everything in the memo, other than this clarified matters, I think this did leave it a little unclear. And I did not have a chance to get back to Suzanne to clarify this. I had a conversation that led to these answers, and this was an exact thing I had said was still confusing us. And Melissa D., you were on that call. I think this is what we're saying is if you adopt this, it's really picked up with more clarity later, is that if you adopt the policy, a member can be in a location that's not open to the public. And you then have that right, if it's an extraordinary circumstance, you have that right to participate from that non-public location as long as that's been noticed, and you don't have to open up to the public. But that caveat, I remain a bit confused by it.
Well, I think what she was talking about is that if somebody was, if 4 people were there and then 2 people just say we're home, and then another person said, I'm down in the Food Town parking lot, and it was publicly noticed as a real location, they then could be counted as part of the quorum, I think.
Right,
Like,
because that's the existing,
Right, but
existing
that's the
law.
existing,
Right.
that's the existing one.
It's a
Right.
blend,
But I
okay.
always thought you had to publicly announce that location when the meeting.
Was
when the
Prior
meeting
to,
was
yes,
noticed
yes.
48 hours before. You
Correct.
have to do it in the month.
no, you have to
That's
do
true.
it, you have to do it before,
So-
right.
I don't know what you want to do about that caveat, because I am, just in full transparency, when I don't like to use that, because I think I'm always open, but I am confused by that. I hate to table this thing for you, but I don't know what that really means.
I agree. Yeah, Doug's point is
And
right.
unless-
It's
Because
the
they
lack
can-
of a time
they
frame.
can-
Unless others get clarity from the others, the answer is very clear, but I saw this in here, and I went, I don't, and I couldn't reach her to say, this
Okay.
is now left it wide open.
Yeah, because the
that's what it
caveat says it's any place where the public can
Right.
attend in person. And if you look at number 3, it
Mhm.
says not open to the public,
Right.
must advise the chair. But this says specifically
Yeah,
not open to the public, so I don't know how you
Yeah.
can have a caveat
I,
that
see,
says
I
has
think
to.
the answer back from Suzanne will be, if you've adopted 103A and had the public hearing, you can have, it because the rest of it's crystal clear. I mean, you can have 4 members, you have to have the quorum in this, let's just, you gotta be here, have the
Right.
quorum here, you could have to up to 3 participating virtually, and if it's extraordinary reasons, then they don't have to have public access where they are, and they can participate and vote, but then this caveat,
Clarifying what physical.
Yeah, I think the
what a physical
caveat is
location
about
is,
the
right?
physical
That's what
location
she's
where
just
the actual
clarifying.
meeting has. It has nothing to do with
But I think,
the locational.
Yeah.
well, Doug's point is, I think it's valid, the crux here, is that there's no, the current law is that if you're participating at a secondary public location, it has to be noticed with the regular notice.
But it says that here, but it does say that in number 3. It says you must advise the chair at least, and then insert the period of time days before the meeting, so the required public meeting notice can be drafted accordingly. So if
that's
you
not in
want to
this
do it, that's what you need to do. So that's in, like, I always knew that was gonna be in this, I just wanna make sure that we're clear.
So in the
That
actual-
you can be
okay.
virtual vote and be at home for, under extraordinary
So it
circumstances.
doesn't capacity to
Yeah.
clarify.
No, it doesn't have to be open to the public, from a location not open to the public.
yeah, the change
You
in
just
the
have
law-
to tell
yeah,
them.
The change in the law is to allow you to vote, participate, and be virtual, not here, as long as there's a quorum here. But then this caveat sitting in here, which maybe the rest of you get it. If you do, go ahead and vote.
Question, can we,
It immediately cut the other direction when I read, unless,
I mean,
Right?
I think
I-
it's different.
When I read it, I felt like we could vote on that. When I read it, it looked, we got the answers to our questions. 4 of us in person, there was a little bit about, a majority being off-site, but in general, I think we're establishing something for what we all expect to be extraordinary circumstances, for when you're out of state, possibly a family matter, but you did want to participate. And I didn't see any glaring speed bumps that made me want to not put this on it. Definitely for 1 year, I felt like we could move forward on this one.
And just to get to the point that Doug made, the point that you made, Doug, and the point that Alex said, it says the chair must be as early as possible before the scheduled meeting they are unable to attend. So that could literally be, if as early as possible is like 5 minutes before.
As long
That's
as
okay.
4 of us
As long
are
as
in
4. Yeah,
person,
yeah, as long as 4
it
is in
doesn't
person.
take anything away from our
Yeah.
public responsibility to have a venue. So at the
Right.
last moment, if you're stuck in New York City and you felt like it, I do believe that 5 minutes would be acceptable. If a majority of us are in person, we're holding a public meeting, it's videotaped, our public seems to be quite comfortable with the way they access our transparency. I believe we can move forward on this sort of item. We're not,
and to your point, it will, because of the state law sunsetting, it will sunset in 1 year. We have an option to vote to renew it, so, okay.
It
yeah,
doesn't say
no, the
sunset.
law does not sunset, but you always have the option as a board to review a policy and
Okay.
so in fact, sorry, go ahead.
Well, one question I have, I mean, I think we know each other here, we all see each other, we're the same people. I don't know who's being elected at some point, for what reason, and I don't know who legislates extraordinary, because you could imagine someone getting on the board, extraordinary, I'm out, and they're gonna keep saying extraordinary, and the board's gonna say, we don't think that's, so does the board legislate what extraordinary is?
Well, it
And do
says
we
that,
essentially say
it
this
says
is
that
not-
in here, right?
Does it say, I didn't see that.
There is some language about,
Yeah,
like,
I'm-
board,
Yeah, Doug,
not in the memorandum.
yeah,
No.
she
She just says it.
well, number 5, she tried to
Yeah.
address that, because Felicity and I raised that exact point with her, Doug, and so 5's written to try and address that, to say that, and she said, yes, extraordinary is a legal term and carries legal meaning, and then she extended this because there's a separate document that actually, Maureen, you saw in the training with Will Kang, which said that, you know, per state law, if you're on a school board, being present and participating is one of the fundamentals, and you could be up for removal by the board. So the board polices itself, understood. So it'd be up to the board president, the board officers, and all of you to police this. But extraordinary means it's really out of the ordinary. These should be rare occurrences. And so I think you want, as a board, if you vote to adopt this, and I think it does give you important flexibility, but if you vote to adopt it, you have to say, we understand that extraordinary means extraordinary, and then
Not a
as
pattern,
you police
right.
yourself,
Yeah.
that you'd say, we may have to intervene.
Right.
And that's what they're trying to write in 5. And she even went to the point Suzanne did, if you see, to participate in
Yeah.
person. At the top of the final page, again, pages aren't
Right,
numbered.
right.
So you see where it says, law and law can say to do so to participate in person.
Yeah. To go back to the policy, which has a little more meat around that, it does define, it says that we have to list extraordinary circumstances and set forth in required written procedures. So I think we get into some of the
Mhm.
So.
Right, and
but
she
do we
says,
have that? We don't have that?
yeah, well,
Well,
it's
you
in
have to-
here.
Yeah.
No, it's in the
one-
policy,
it's
it's
in
in
the
the draft
policy.
policy for.
Disability, illness, health concerns, caregiving
Yeah, it's
responsibility,
attached
business
to the,
trips.
it's in the board docs. It's, no, there's a draft, the draft
Yeah.
policy which you would adopt is here in the material for you.
So it's
Yeah.
B1,
First.
B1 listed.
Yeah, disability, illness, health concerns, caregiving responsibilities, business trips, or another significant or unexpected factor. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that she says that the law does act to limit the use is intended to recognize the expectation that members of public bodies, here BOE members, will, whenever possible, regularly attend meetings in person.
Doug, how does that hit you?
I think it's not a low probability, but you can also imagine a world where someone just decides they're going to be traveling for business all the time. Is it extraordinary at that point? I mean, I find that we never know what's going to happen 5 years from now. I don't like to create these open-ended policies that require judgment that, I mean, it's all policy requires judgment.
But we can go back year after
I
year.
mean, disability, illness, health concern, caregiving responsibilities seem like extraordinary. You know, within reason, right? The first 3 for sure. Caregiving, that can get out of hand sometimes. Business trips can get out of hand sometimes. And at what point are you kind of derelict in your duty for what you agreed to, but you think it's fine?
So is it the absence or the participation that concerns you? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what your thoughts
I think it's the gray area, the size of the gray area.
Just a gray area.
Yeah.
If someone hasn't shown up for 6 months, there's no point, right?
Do we put a restriction?
We did, right, because I was in here. There's just a lot of judgment.
But it says, I mean, her point says, like, is deemed repealed on July 24th. In the meantime, should the BOE wish to reserve the right to review the policy or its regulations, we need only say so. So every year, like, if it seems like it's getting abused, then somebody on the BOE brings it up and says, I want to review policy, blah, blah, blah.
Wait, if the governing statute expires July 1st, 2024, 16 months from now, that is a hard sunset.
Yeah, that's why it's so weird. That's the start. Does the policy sunset each year?
Right.
Or is it permanent required BOE?
No,
Is that correct?
change?
No, the policy
Does not sunset.
Does not sunset. The overall governing law does, but it's deemed repealed, meaning it could well be continued.
Right.
So, but you as a board, this would not be a policy that sunsets unless you as a board remove it or modify it.
But I think he's trying to get at something legitimate, which is, you know, it's a pandemic. People can participate productively that we've seen in meetings that we've never had before. I don't know what we do here though, but I think my sense is also like participating in the side of it, and that doesn't really work, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, I think it's also dependent on how high quality, you know, are you here, and we're talking on the screen, you know, it's gotta feel, if people are participating and voting on real business, it's gotta, like, you know, Jeremy called it once and, you know, was missing
Couldn't
some
hear.
words that were being spoken, right? And I don't think you were.
But that was
voting.
an executive
It was
session.
an executive session, we weren't voting, but like, if that were a real meeting, that becomes somewhat, you know, problematic. So I don't know if there's something about how the participation looks also, right?
Wait, is this, executive sessions, does this count for this idea of remoting into an executive?
No,
session?
because in an executive session, we
No, the
don't
only
make
reason I
any
asked that is
votes.
because I think that would be a mistake, because I think executive session, part of it is that everyone's in the same room. I mean, I know I wouldn't feel comfortable if people were like outside of it. I'm just wondering, is that for just the public board meeting?
Well, the question is, if we table it, what are our opportunities to actually try to direct it a little better? Because it's not gonna go back down to the policy committee. We're not gonna have an executive session on it, so what, you know.
Well, we don't actually have to table it. You could just have a motion to vote on it and see if two people want to vote on it and then see if it gets voted down. But does that mean that you wouldn't want to bring it back up? Is that what the thinking is?
I mean, you could send it back to the policy committee and say, here, please, you know, for further analysis. But I also hear Jeremy's good advice is, you know, you call the question, see where you land.
I'm open to either or. I think the other thing on that, even though, community is not, that's still up for our discretion, right?
Right, and I mean, normally I'm against a limit, but if this policy is only gonna be in effect for 16 months, until we have to,
The thing I would caution though is, at the moment that you need to do that, you're already in the middle of an issue, and it's already a contentious issue, like.
Doug, I'm missing because one aspect is that we're allowing board members who've been elected to vote. And that's not going to be contentious. You know, if one of the 7 people wants to vote, but you're contentious that we don't know what we're opening, and what if they vote 5 meetings in a row without coming in person?
It's not just about voting, it's about participating. It's not just voting.
I'm okay with an elected board member participating remotely.
Yeah, that's okay.
but not as a standard of behavior, you're saying,
But
right?
not as a standard behavior, there's a certain.
I think the concern, if I may, is how do we define the extraordinary?
Extraordinary. Number one, how do you define extraordinary? What teeth do we have to hold them accountable? If we feel if we feel these circumstances are not extraordinary, but they want to make the case that they are, right? Where the gray area is. Well,
I mean, it seems
Yeah,
like you want to
there's
have
some
some
area.
safeguards to like assure what the quality of both the preparation and the participation are for people who are remote. Because oftentimes, just because of logistical, technical reasons, there's a reason that we can't engage in the same way that we do when we're all in the same room. So does that detract from the actual substance that we are investing in the public's work, right? For public service.
And I'll jump back in one more time, because 2 weeks ago I suggested we put a number on it. And that was a question we threw at, you know, our council, and they said she would recommend against the number, because what if you get COVID twice in 2 weeks? But if what you're saying is, look, why don't we put a number on it? You know, then I guess we would throw it back, and if that's what would make you feel more comfortable, I was comfortable with that, saying, look, you can do it 3 meetings out a year. We have 24 meetings in a year. After 3 meetings, just please miss it, and you watch it like a resident. I'm okay with putting a number on it. I'm okay with not putting a number on it. Yep.
I mean, especially if it's gonna be,
The
again,
other question is just a practical question of technology.
That's what I was asking. How's it gonna work? No, we don't. No, not for multiple people, for one person at a time.
Well, if
Like, on a screen, we could only do one person, we don't video
It's worth
conferencing.
mentioning because, for example, when we had, remote instruction during the pandemic, if at home someone had different like latency and bandwidth issues than when students were trying to access the instruction, everyone was doing their best job. There were some occasions where it was harder for faculty to be remote, and we continue to have these discussions even with committee meetings, like really similarly about, do we need to be in person or can we be hybrid? Like, what's the internet quality going to be in terms of participation? And that is variable, and it is an ongoing discussion based on who's on the committee.
But I was
All of a
also
sudden,
saying,
someone in extraordinary circumstances, they have a latent connection, they're asking you to repeat all the time, and it's screwing up, I'm just.
It's valid.
It seems a lot of
I hear what you're
places where this thing can go awry.
but also if you have
But
multiple
I'm thinking
people,
about it from the other side.
how are we doing?
The two times we experienced it, once with Damaris and once with Alex, I felt that they were successful.
I was fully engaged.
Yeah, I felt like everybody was fully engaged, and in my opinion, I would rather have as much participation as possible, given something, rather than, Alex saying, sorry, my kids are sick, I can't be a part of it at all. So we don't at all get the benefit of any questions or comments that Alex might have, which are so amazing always.
Thank you.
But, you know what I mean? Like, so I see it the other way. Like, I would rather think that it could only be positive and try it out versus taking away that option to even do it at all. Like, why wouldn't you want to do something that can add to a discussion?
Yeah, I think, I'm not talking for, this is so funny.
The influence?
I was telling him, I feel when he wants to speak, now I know why I was telling him all the time. Because he seems not to say, it's just like, now I know why I was cutting all the time, because now sitting next to him, I know how he has, I don't know what to say, but it never really came out. But I'm not talking for him, I'm just saying that I want to sort of redirect to the concern of taking things for granted, right? Which some of us, we know it happens in our spaces, like, this is like a loophole for me not to do what I have no one to use my guns in my head to do. So, then, I think I don't think we are saying we shouldn't let it happen, but how can we hold each other accountable? And I'm thinking that, I don't know the answer, but I'm thinking that Jeremy has thrown some suggestion out about putting a specific number, and that's it, and you can do more than that. Which, again, if like, and then you can speak just like any other person, when you just watching, that's all there is to it.
Let me ask a question then. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, and then, I also, going back to what Doug said, that we need to put some, like, what these examples are, what are we doing for extraordinary, like, we need to give it some, so I think these are the two things that we need to look at again, and if we think we should, talk, just vote on it now and then sort of firm it up, or we should table it and go to the policy committee, works on it, and then bring it back and get input from our colleagues. I think these are the two that we should.
I think there's also the technology is a legitimate, like if it's not possible to have two connections plus the quorum, then that will guide us, then we can say only one connection, or I don't know how we would work through that, but I think that's a valid point.
Okay. So it does sound like there's more questions. I think it would be appropriate to table it, put it back for policy with the BOE perspective.
Yeah, I think, that's really, if there's some specific things you want to zero in on. I mean, I'm hearing technology.
I mean,
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm personally fine moving forward with it, as long as the technology solution itself. I mean, if we want to just deal with whatever comes up, it comes up.
So this policy would go to public comment. Is there any opportunity to change it subsequent to us voting on it tonight?
I think, you could get a very specific final markup done by Suzanne for you.
Okay, so we're not locked into anything, so we could pass.
I think so.
We have public comment, so I would assume there's some other bite of the apple. Okay, so just to be clear, we can pass it tonight, and there will be an additional opportunity if we're not committed to the text, it's totally as is. Because there's also placeholders in it, actually, so.
Right.
Okay, so, is everybody comfortable where we're at on that?
Yes.
Okay, so with all that in mind, is there a motion to approve the resolution to set a public hearing and adopt section 103A of the Open Meetings Law? And the Hastings draft video conferencing regulations? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Moving on, second public comment, as busy as it was earlier. To agenda review, this is upcoming topics.
Yeah, let me just, quick update for you. Next meeting, the 25th, SPED Advisory Committee update, you already knew about that. The 9th, the National Blue Ribbon School Award. These are additional items, not the only things before you. There's a budget work session, on the 25th, as well as what I mentioned in terms of the SPED Advisory Committee. And then on the 9th, you also have another budget work session, plus you're voting on the budget calendar. That's a standard piece. On the 22nd, we did understand you wanted as you're allowed under state law, executive session just for an overview of school security, district and school security. So we have secured that for you as an executive session on the 22nd. So those really are the 22nd is the key update. I just wanted to review what's coming in the next several meetings.
Can we just have the list of what's going to be covered in the budget work session?
Sure.
Just for next time? not
Yep.
now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
All right, open up for any Board of Education comments.
Alex, we have to go back and vote on the code of conduct.
Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over it.
Good catch, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa, I'm so sorry. I skipped over 11A. So is there a motion to approve the district code of conduct? Is there a second? All in favor? Thanks, Melissa. All right, move back to board comments. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? No? Oh yeah, it's the first time. That's, well, Patrick's really far away from us, but thank you, Patrick. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
A second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you.